Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Resource Adequacy Modeling and Program Design Working Group. Thanks everyone who's joining us in person and for listening to that safety briefing. My name is Caitlin McGee, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the California ISO, and I'll be helping facilitate today's meeting. If you're joining us in person, there's some coffee and pastries in the back, and if you're online, hopefully you have your coffee with you. I'm joined today by joined with Jeff McDonald from CEA Advisors, and then our folks on the RA policy team who will be helping jump in throughout today's meeting. So unfortunately, our slide deck for today's meeting should be posted online in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Hopefully you'll see it and be able to pull it up on the policy initiative webpage. And that's under the Stay Informed tab. All right, for folks online, just a few housekeeping reminders before we get started today. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. These collaborative working groups are intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives, but we do ask that you please keep your comments professional and respectful. So today's going to be a hybrid meeting. We're going to try to balance questions and comments through WebEx and those that are here in person today. So if you're joining us through WebEx, there's a few ways you can raise your hand. If you're connected to audio through your computer using the Call Me option, you can click the raise hand icon at the bottom right toolbar. If you are calling through an audio only line, you can click #2. That'll add you to the queue. And then if you prefer to ask your comment or question in the chat, I can read it aloud to the folks in person and online. When you are asking your question, we do ask that you state your name and affiliation before making your comment. I'll try my best to kind of help facilitate that portion as well. And then if you have any technical difficulties on WebEx today, you can send a chat to the event producer and they'll help you out. And then here in the room, we'll try to move questions along. I think what's helped in the past is if you just flip your name tag up and we'll count that as a raised hand. So here is the graphic I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This is just a quick overview of the policy development process here at the California ISO. And as I mentioned, I think we're on working group 2 today. So we're at the very beginning of this, the pre-development process, going through the working group meetings and the discussion paper. So we have a full agenda for a short meeting today. I'll hand it over to Jeff in a minute here. He's gonna walk us through the welcome and purpose today. We'll talk about the problem statement 1 and some stakeholder feedback that we received. Aditya is going to talk us through CAISO modeling related to problem statement 1. We'll take a brief 15-minute break around 11:30. We are going to go in kind of to lunch hour and end by 1 today. So we'll have a brief 15-minute break, and then we'll return and hand it back to Jeff to, again, talk us through the stakeholder feedback on problem statements 2 and 3, introduce stakeholder feedback on principles and goals, and then we'll have some folks from our policy team, Phoebe and Partha, talk about day-ahead sufficiency and settlements, and then back to Jeff on process feedback and roadmap for the working group, and we'll close it out with the next steps and upcoming meeting dates. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff.
Good morning. This is Jeff McDonald. Thank you, Caitlin, for getting us rolling. So we do have a full agenda. So before I get to the working group goals there are just a couple things I'd like to point out on the agenda. So I want to thank everyone for providing thoughtful comments. There were quite a bit of comments from quite a number of representatives who are participants in this working group, and it was fantastic. Those are posted on the web. And one of the things that we'll roll through here is sort of a summary and categorization of those comments. And I'm really hoping, especially with respect to problem statement 1, I'd like to use the comments that were submitted or the summary of the comments that we have on slides here as a launching point for discussion. So I guess I'm sort of warning you in advance that when we get to that part of the discussion, I'll be picking out some of the comments, some of the comment categorical areas, and asking some of the folks who submitted those comments to provide a little bit more background, a little bit more insight as to why they were either concerned about that or would like to move forward in that direction, and use that as a launching point for discussion. With that in mind, the way we decided to break up this particular meeting was to focus on problem statement 1 and some of the sub-issues associated with that. We're going to cover stakeholder comments on problem statements 2 and 3, but at a higher level. And when we, after this meeting, since we're focused a little bit more on problem statement 1, in subsequent meetings, we'll dive deeper into problem statements 2 and 3, and I'll cover that a little bit more. I'll cover the multi-meeting sort of cycle for dealing with different problem statements and having discussions about those when we get to the end, last couple of slides of this meeting. But I just wanted to set it up for folks that, 1, we're focusing on problem statement 1 so that we can have a little bit of a deeper dive at this point. And 2 is we're going to have many bites at the problem statement 1 apple, as well as problem statements 2 and 3. But again, as I mentioned, as we get towards the end of this this meeting, we'll have a little bit more discussion about this cycle of comments, discussion, deep dive by the ISO, refining the problem statements, and so forth across multiple meetings as we get towards the end. So thank you for that. So the RA working group goals. So this is a high level expression of the goals of the working group. In a slide or two, I'll cover what the goals are for this meeting, or what I perceive the goals are for this meeting. But as we talked about last time, this working group needs to work through developing principles and goals. Initial problem statements, we have 3 straw proposal or draft problem statements from ISO staff that we're starting to work with. One of the things that I'm hoping we see as we move through this discussion, meeting after meeting, is getting some problem statements, some additional problem statements from working group participants. That would be a fantastic outcome of this. Another great outcome would be if we further refine the problem statements, which is I think one of the primary goals in general, is to work through those and refine them through a group effort. Align priorities and establish meeting cadence. So we've already talked about meeting cadence. We did get some feedback from participants. There were various perspectives on that, and I'm sure we'll revisit that again. Based on the feedback from participants, looks like the cadence is going to be every few weeks, maybe about every 3 weeks or so. It might be every 4 weeks for the cadence. Priorities, I think we'll probably need to have further discussions on. There was a lot of variation in the comments from participants on what different priorities were. As I mentioned, refining the problem statements is probably the primary goal of this working group. And as a facilitator and talking with ISO staff and having some conversations with some of the working group participants over the last few weeks, I'm certainly from my perspective, my goal is that after each of these meetings, we're in some way measurably closer to having a better defined or more clearly defined problem statement or sub-issues within those problem statements. So as I think about all of the different goals and priorities and so forth, the highest priority, I think, for us is to have discussion, learn what we can about the issues, further refine problem statements, and move forward in that fashion. So in my view, that is how you would measure a successful working group meeting. And then determine action items, which is at the end once we've defined the problem statements. Each problem statement is defined as a working group. We'll determine what the actions are and forward that into the ISO's initiative process. So before I move on, are there any questions or from the, I guess we used to say from the phone, but from anyone who's not here?
And for folks who have a question, kind of flag up your name tag. That'll help us along. And on WebEx, bottom right, we'll drop your question into the chat. And right now, it looks like it's online.
Okay. I don't see any cards up, so we'll move forward. So the slide shows us where we are in the working group process. So we've already covered principles a little bit. We'll probably cover them again. Later after we've dealt with some of the problem statements a little bit. We are currently in the refining and getting some granularity and clarity on the problem statements, after which we move on to assessment and resolution. So for this meeting, and I'll refer back to, I think the slides are posted, so if you pull them up, you can refer back yourself to the schedule to see where the emphasis is, but you'll see we're covering a couple of different things. For this particular meeting, I felt like the primary goal was to better understand and, through conversation, further refine problem statement 1. I'm very hopeful that as we walk through and talk through some of the participant feedback on problem statement 1, that we'll have some good discussion. For those on WebEx, we've got about 7 working group participants here in the room, and there's quite a few of you online, so hopefully we can get a discussion there that helps move us in the direction of refining problem statement 1. We decided to devote less time to problem statements 2 and 3, as I mentioned before, so we'll cover and hopefully discuss participant comments on those, but it'll be over a shorter period of time. We'll cover those in more detail later, but just having a conversation and better understanding the issues associated with problem statements 2 and 3 is one of the goals. We will cover principles and goals. I'll talk a little bit about some of the participant feedback on that, and hopefully we can have a discussion with that as well. And then we're going to have some discussion on the path of meeting topics. So just to tee that up a little bit for folks, as I was looking at the comments, I was looking at so there's only 3 problem statements, but there really is a breadth of issues to deal with. And trying to figure out how, as a group, we decide what topics we would like to cover meeting by meeting, and then also have that feather in with ISO bandwidth for providing additional information, deep dive studies that inform you and inform your ability to further refine some of these problem statements. And I realized it would take meetings for us to come up collectively with a sense of the progression that we would like to deal with issues over the next several meetings or next several months. So refine the path of meeting topics. I have a straw proposal, and I'll explain it towards the end of this meeting. I have a straw proposal for how we talk through and work through some of these issues over the next couple months. And I thought that would be a good way to start. At least then we have a plan. You can kick the plan. You can have alternate suggestions for that schedule, and I'm happy to talk about that. But I just wanted to have, for the next few months, some sort of plan for us to work through these issues while we also talk about priorities and dependencies and timing and so forth. So one of the goals for the meeting is to refine that. If, to the extent anyone has thoughts on it, happy to take those into consideration. And lastly, and this is my favorite one, I think, is establish opportunities and volunteers for participant presentations. So I think going forward, reading through the comments, there were quite a few very thoughtful, very well-informed opinions about some of these issues. And as a group, I think it's fantastic if we could get some people to present their positions on some of these issues and start a conversation. I think that's going to be a great way for the group to work together to have a better understanding of some of these issues. So we won't, at the end of this meeting, I'm happy to take volunteers for different topics and so forth, especially within the structure that's been set out for the next couple of months, which may or may not change. But over the next few weeks or so, we'll probably try to reach out to see, and hopefully you'll reach out to us. You can send an email to me or to the policy group. Please reach out if you would like to give a presentation and represent your thoughts or position on some of these issues. We would love to have that be one of the centerpieces of discussion. So that's the meeting goals. Any questions on the meeting goals? Okay. All right. So we're going to launch in. Oh, did I hear someone say something? Oh, yes, Brian.
Hey, Jeff. Brian Thaker with Middle River Power. Could we back up one slide, please? Appreciate the discussion on the meeting goals. I hope this is not out of scope, but let me throw another question into you, which is, I'd be happy for you or somebody up at the dais to articulate kind of what the goal of the working group process is going to be. What do we want? How will we know when the working group process is over and we're ready to proceed into the initiative? And what do we hope to get out of the working group process? Just a series of defined problem statements, something more than that. So just throw it open to you or to the panel to take a shot at that.
Sure. Why don't I will give you my take on it as I've discussed it with ISO staff, and please feel free if anyone would like to add to it. But the primary goal, if you think back to the larger process sequence, the working group meeting is the opportunity for stakeholders to get together and be in control of and get out in front of issues that are pressing, that they would like the ISO to address, and put some meat on that with defining the issue, defining the problem itself, not just the issue, but what problem is it causing? Is this a big problem or a small problem? Is this an ISO problem or a CPUC problem, and so forth? And so with that in mind, when I was talking with the ISO about my role here and how can I help you get to where you need to be on these things, the where you need to be was the issue, and that's your question. And the where you need to be, as I understand it, is identifying issues that need to be addressed, and not just identifying them, but providing enough clarity and getting enough understanding and articulation of the problems that those issues are solving or are causing, that they can be turned into a fairly thoughtful problem statement and forwarded to the ISO to be considered in their initiative process. So this is the stakeholders' opportunity to collectively provide thoughtful and thorough input into the stakeholder process so that their issues can be considered in that scheduling. So that was my understanding. As I keep getting back, as I think through this and my role in this, I keep getting back to the real goal here is to identify problems, put enough specificity on them, explain why they're a problem, and then move them into the ISO process. Your question of, and so for the RA working group, there's many problems. So if you look at the problem statement, there's 3 problem statements with quite a few sub-issues, right? So so procedurally, I don't think we wait until the end until we've got all of those and any other things that participants come up with specified and have one big package to move over. I think as soon as we've got one of those problems or sub-problems fairly well identified, you know, as a group, we decide, okay, we're going to package this up and we're going to forward it over to the ISO. Is that, that was a lot of words, Brian, a lot of words. Did that address your question or did I just talk?
No, I think so. I appreciate that, Jeff. Let me just throw in a secondary question to that. Do you envision, as part of that issue identification, that the working group process will provide some kind of prioritization so that when we get ready to head into the initiative, we know, okay, this is the most pressing problem we think we need to tackle. Let's go after this one first. This is a problem, but it's not as immediate. We can put that off. Do you envision that prioritization will also be an output of the working group process?
I think it is, at least implicitly. And I've wrestled a little bit with how to do that explicitly. So once we get a list that will never be an exhaustive list, but a decent list of the issues that need to be addressed, do we vote on them? You know, when I said implicitly a moment ago, you know, I think we could come up with an implicit prioritization, at least based on the working group prioritization from the comments. But is that a fair representation of, you know, is every interest equally represented in the comments? Some people chose not to comment. That was their choice. But I struggle with how to get an explicit prioritization. Getting an implicit prioritization is pretty easy from the comments and from the conviction expressed in some of the comments. So let me ask you, Brian, how would we as a group explicitly prioritize in a way that was, I hate to use the word fair because it means something different to everybody, but something like fair?
A great question, Jeff. And, you know, clearly the ISO's process is not, stakeholder process is not the way other those run. There are defined sectors and votes, and you can arrive at prioritization, you know, just through numerical methods. So we don't have that.
Right.
I asked the question in part because there are some things that I think, for example, slice of day implementation, and this was discussed, I think, earlier, is that's on its own schedule, slated to be implemented in 2025. I think there are outstanding issues to work through with regard to that a priori kind of lends itself to saying, well, this is perhaps one of the things that would float to the top. But, you know, ideally, since we don't have a formal voting structure, we could do it through consensus. But however we do it, and it's a great question to which I don't have an answer. I think it would be important that when we get ready to go into the initiative, we have hopefully explicit, but at least a very strong implicit sense of what are the things that we need to go.
Okay. And, you know, to the extent other folks, I mean, this is actually a very important issue since there are a number of issues identified and everything takes time. So prioritization and the order in which things are addressed are important. And I'll just give me 30 seconds. And also what's also important, I think, are some things we talked about before, which are dependencies and scheduling amongst issues. That complicates it a fair amount. And then you've got ISO bandwidth issues as well. So this is complicated in a sense, which I guess was why it was a good question. But anyway, Partha.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's a good point. I think Jeff really hit on all the main topics. I'd be interested. You called out slice a day in particular, and that was obviously a major theme we heard in the first work. Had scheduled a workshop on next week on the delve into some of those issues. It's like, to me, that was our attempt at example of, like, you know, we've heard that feedback. We've heard that feedback, obviously, you know, going back to the CPUC process, twice a day, and wanting that coordination. But yeah, if there are ways in terms of their issues are coming up quicker that you feel like, hey, we really have to move this to sort of the top of the list. Otherwise, I was thinking more of the sequencing issue. and a prioritization in terms of the impact topic. But to me, also it falls into obviously a timing something's really urgent from a implementation schedule. Yeah, let me know, Brian, if that's not working right or that's not addressing twice a day. Yeah, love to hear the feedback or love to hear how we can expand it. Thank you.
Sure, Partha, I'll just point out the obvious. For example, on the gas resource management work, the ISO sent out a survey monkey and asked people to rank the 11 problem statements, and from that, they at least have a numerical ranking. You know, there are externalities that impinge on that suggest that just simply working through the issues in that order of priority may or may not work. But even input like that is helpful in the process for people to identify what they believe are the most pressing. Then that again, lacking a formal stakeholder process, that's at least a relatively crisp input into the conversation about where do we go. And
Yeah, and that's a great idea, and maybe that's something that we can consider doing here as well. And it moves us halfway in between the implicit divining of priorities from conviction and comments and something, you know, more structured and fair voting system. So I like that. Thank you. Yes.
Steve Edison, I just want to follow up on that. I agree. I think that the price of day is kind of two issues with price of day. One is just making sure that your systems are aligned with work. And I know a lot of the LSEs are worried that, you know, about making sure if they meet the CPUC requirements, they're still going to meet the KISO requirements and backstop here. I think that needs to move forward much faster because that takes effect in 25, which means the first annual filing for that is going to have to be end of October in 24. And procurement for all that stuff start happening, not happening now, probably spring. So entities really need to know what the rules are going to be, how it's going to be dealt with. So one of the things we put in our comments was put this up and not wait to do a formal stakeholder initiative on everything, but start one on that right now so that we can get answers out towards the end of the year. Because there are things happening right now. At the end of this month, entities are supposed to file their advisory filing for next year with the CPUC using their new spreadsheet tool. And then the PUC's energy is supposed to report on that February 1st. So, you know, understanding and working with that so that people understand exactly how things are going to translate from that to your stuff, and then how your validation is going to translate back to where this is. That's going to, I think that has to take priority. The other stuff will be nice, but getting that part, making sure that part is actually critical for sure that RA is going to function 25 RA.
And, go ahead.
No, let's probably reiterating what I said to Brian. So like, let me know, Steve. Like, you know, obviously we're going to have the workshop, and our team will be facilitating that process, and that we're trying to take on the issues that you're addressing. If we're not hitting all the marks yet, please, you know, reach out to us. From a process standpoint, we're not getting all the right topics. Yeah, love to hear that feedback. Really appreciate it.
Just real quick, so for the folks in the room, do your best to bring the microphone as close as possible. These are newer microphones that they seem to have a voice isolation, so there's a lot of kind of privacy in the speaking. And if you can't hear yourself in the room, then our folks on WebEx probably can't hear. So we'll try to be as clear for everyone.
Yeah, and Steve, what I heard from you is, and I'm maybe filling a little bit in before and after what you said, but that the slice of day was broken out because of some of the reasons that you mentioned. Your comments were really about prioritizing within the slice a day process, it's a separate process, prioritizing how to move a little bit faster, respecting some of the requirements that are coming up. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I view it, there's kind of two different parts to that. One is making sure that in 25, your systems are going to function with what the PUC is giving you, and that you have the right, that the data they're giving you, you understand the reliability implications of it, because they're going to give you one number, so it'll probably flow through your system. But is that number the same as you've been getting in years past? I think the answer to that is probably not, because they're not going to be using the ELCC numbers. They're going to be using the different way that they're going to construct it. So I think that's part one. Part two is, should the CAISO adopt something like it, or do we need to make some long-term changes to the CAISO processes to move closer to that? Would that improve things? Those are important questions that I think should be addressed. But they're not, if that doesn't happen for 25, I think that's obviously, it probably should happen at some point, but if it's not for 25, at least making sure that what the PUC is doing works with what ISO needs, that's critical for 25. And if that's not there, then we're going to have major problems. And I think so. And like I said, that needs to happen sooner rather than later, because people have to be able to procure and know, if they procure something that meets their needs for the PUC slice a day, they also need to know how that's going to translate into meeting ISOs. And, kind of I think one of the worst states would be where you're compliant with the CPUC and they say that you're not short, but you end up backstopping for it because it's not there, and still, charge an LSE.
Sure, and I appreciate the additional detail, and it sounds like that is a good example of how prioritization is affected by timing of needs and so forth, and that's in its own process. And we'll try and keep those types of factors in consideration in the non-slice a day processes that we're dealing with in here as well. Any other comments before we move on? Okay. Oh, actually, before we move on, so Brian, my takeaway is we need to send out a survey that gets us the half step between implicit and explicit. So we'll talk about doing that.
Yeah, and Jeff, to be perfectly clear, I would not direct you to do that. I'm just pointing out, I think it was a helpful piece of the gas resource management process that I think when you've got, as you pointed out, 3 multi-part problems, with a whole lot of issues, I think it just helps the data point that helps prioritize these.
Thank you. All right, so let's move into talking about participant feedback on problem statement 1. So this slide just gives a high-level topical expression of the 3 different problem statements. Everyone's familiar with that, and I am running a couple minutes behind, so I won't talk about this in particular. We're going to talk about them specifically later anyway. So problem statement 1, this is up here just for your reference, actually. Everybody is familiar with the problem statements. Like I said, we got a lot of fantastic comments from people on the problem statements and the subparts. So this is specifically related to overall system reliability. I'll let you read it yourself if you like, but we'll move on to participant comments. And so, I'll reiterate here, this is where I would love to get some conversation going as folks have an opportunity to further elaborate on the comments that they submitted that are available on the web. So we broke these into sort of general themes, this slide. There are a number of slides that follow that have a little bit more information, and they're categorized by commenter. So you can go through and look at those. I'll use the subsequent slides to this as reference during our conversation when we get that rolling. I don't intend to go through the next slides there again for your reference, but what we saw there was general support. We did not see in the comments that anyone vehemently opposed problem statement 1 or thought that it in its entirety should be deprioritized. We saw there were actually quite a few comments on requests for overview of the current process. As someone who was familiar with the RA program 10 years ago and then tried to refamiliarize myself with the RA program starting about 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I can tell you a lot has happened, and if you've lived through it, it might not seem like a lot, but in the last 10 years, and it was apparent in the comments that a lot of people felt like there were parts of the RA program that they needed some specificity on and maybe some re-education on in order to understand the whole, to be better positioned to comment on what issues were important and how to help refine them. So I'd like to get a conversation started on that, but I think we had a conversation last time about what I call the umbrella of RA 101. And I know the ISO staff, the policy staff, are putting together a set of resources and considering other opportunities. I think online, I hate to call it training, but online overview of different aspects of the RA program as it stands now, sort of in the order of importance, if that's the right word, or in the order of issues that are scheduled to be addressed through this process, but it would be more comprehensive than that. So I think we have that addressed, or it is being addressed. So to move beyond that, there's increased visibility into non-RA. That was commented on by a number of participants, and some people felt that the visibility needed to be increased. And as you'll note on there, some parties felt that that was a lower priority. So I would like to ask, actually, if we've got, I will pick on NCPA, if NCPA is has joined us through the WebEx. Can the representative from NCPA provide a little bit of additional detail on increasing visibility into non-RA and why they feel that's important? I will then turn to Middle River, who felt that it should be deprioritized, and we'll see if we can get a conversation started on that.
We have a couple folks on the line from NCPA. If you do want to speak up, you can raise your
And you don't have to. I'm just trying to get a conversation started so it's not just me talking at the podium, right? Because that's not a working group, that's a Jeff group, and that's not going to get you where you need to go.
We do have Mike Whitney today online. Have him start.
All right, Mike.
Yay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Yeah, the audio's been a little spotty, but that's my fault. We're in Roseville right next door to you, so I probably should have just showed up in person, so apologies for that. So yeah, as far as increasing visibility into non-RA, I'm not sure if our comments were captured entirely accurately. We were kind of confused about CAISO's issues with visibility into non-RA, seeing how CAISO publishes non-RA reports every month. So, I mean, CAISO has visibility to all the CAISO resources in the fleet, whether they claim RA or not. We know that because some of our RA isn't claimed because some of our resources are owned by non-CAISO entities. So they reserve it for like export, non-RA and whatnot. And when there's system emergencies, CAISO calls on us to give them everything we got, whether it's been claimed for RA or not. So that's our perspective. We feel that I think we probably should have been with Middle River and kind of deprioritizing, because we feel like you guys have plenty of visibility into RA. Because I mean, typically folks are, whether or not it's RA, folks are trying to monetize these resources, so they're bidding them into the market, whether or not they have RA obligations on them. So yeah, if CAISO wants to add some clarity to why they placed NCPA where they did, I'd be happy to hear it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for coming on and explaining that. And I apologize if I miscategorized or misexpressed your comment. There were a lot of comments, and there might be one or two or three where I didn't quite capture, and you know, it might be a little bit misrepresented. So I apologize for that, and I appreciate you coming on to explain it. So okay, so we have a deprioritize from NCPA, which gets Middle River off the hook for representing that perspective, unless you'd like to.
For solely representing it, thank you, Jeff.
Okay, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, Brian, thank you. With Middle River, I'll be glad to delve into a little bit of our thinking on this. First, we share Mike's observation that the ISO should have visibility into every resource within its operational footprint. That's just a given. That's just sound operation. So we're a little confused about what was intended with non-RA. Is that capacity that's under an RA contract but not on a showing? And clearly we think if that's the case, there's a reason for that, which is people holding back capacity for planned outages. And the whole planned outage situation is one we'd like to see delved back into again, because it is, we believe it's a nightmare to secure capacity for replacement on planned outages. So we're hoping at some point we get to open that hood again and look under it. This question to us felt a little funny because the premise is the RA program should provide the ISO with all the capacity it needs to maintain reliability within its footprint, consistent with applicable reliability. If the RA program doesn't do that, then for us the issue is, are the requirements? Less so, can the ISO see things that aren't RA? So that's the way the question felt to it. It's probably why it shaped the answer that we provided in the way it is. But anyway, that's how we looked at this question. Again, sharing a bit of NCPA's confusion, but again, feeling like, wait, if the RA program is doing its job, visibility into non-RA shouldn't be.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, thank you very much. Does someone else have their card up? Yeah, please.
I don't know, maybe Partha, I saw you had your
I'm
card
sorry,
up.
could you start off with your name
Yeah.
and who you're from, just for my benefit at least?
Yeah, this is Lauren Carr from Cal CCA.
Yeah.
Did you want to clarify what the CAISO meant, or do you want me to dive in first? Because I was on the.
Why don't you dive in?
Okay, so how we understood this theme, I guess, is obviously the CAISO has visibility to all the resources in the system, but it's not necessarily clear if it's not on a showing where those to or what they're being used for. They could be not on a showing because they're being used for substitution, like Brian said. They may be dedicated to or like under contract with an entity outside of the CAISO as like an export from CAISO or an import into another balancing authority. And so we don't know now when we look at that list of non-RA resources if it's just that they're not on a showing, but they could be dedicated to CAISO if the CAISO has to EPM or something like that, or if they are under contract or dedicated for some other use. Or, I don't know. So that's why we were under support, because we think increased visibility into where supply that's not on an RA showing.
Okay, thank you very much. And so let me try to articulate my understanding of the two sides. So the ISO does have visibility into what it needs, as need is defined by what is shown for RA. The argument for increased visibility is there's more out there. It may wind up being shown at some point, or it may be needed in a backstop capacity. In that circumstance, it would be visible at that point, right? Once it is folded into the ISO's needs umbrella through the RA process. But the argument is it would be good for the ISO to be able to see it prior to that anyway on an ongoing basis. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And if a need does arise, you know, it could appear just by looking at what's not shown that there is supply available, and then if it's out to backstop it or something that it turns out it's really not dedicated. So I guess upfront visibility about what is available to the ISO.
I see. Yep. No, that's definitely a finer point to it. So it's not just visibility to what isn't RA. It's visibility into what might be available to be RA. It should the need arise. Thank you. Yeah.
We do have a question online. Ian White with Shell Energy, go ahead. Okay, now you're unmuted, Ian.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. I couldn't get off mute there. I just wanted to echo something that Brian from Middle River mentioned, and that was the notion that the RA capacity sort of set aside for substitution is, I think, really a problem. And so I would just echo what he said. I'm hopeful that we can at some point talk about that as an issue. Not really a question, more of a comment. I hope that's okay at this juncture. And that's all I had.
Thank you, Ian. All right. So that was great. We had a discussion and people participated. Oh, we have more. Great. Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve Keen from Edison. I think for me, part of this issue is maybe the need for interregional coordination as resources are shared and potentially, as pointed out, CAISO resources may be shared with other parts of the West. I mean, the CAISO knows what it was given as RA. It knows what all the resources are that are attached to it. And it knows which of those are on outages and which ones are able to be called upon for energy, not necessarily for RA, but at least for energy. What it may not know is which ones may be sold outside of the West. And likewise, the other problem it has is it has no idea what's available outside. It knows the RA resources, the RA imports that are sold to it, but it doesn't know what else may be out there. So, I mean, I think that's something that we may want to put on the list of things to look at in the future is coordinating with the rest of the West so that there's an understanding of, okay, yeah, the CAISO knows what resources aren't listed as RA, which ones are able to sell, but which one, whether they're committed somewhere else. And I mean, that would also help with avoiding the issues of having resources double counted.
Yep. No, it sounds actually, from someone with my background, it sounds like one of the primary benefits of doing that is so you don't wind up with 130% of capacity in the West being qualified and shown in different ISOs. So that sounds like almost a primary benefit.
Some of that may come about through, I don't know if EDAM's going to do it, but through those processes. But I think that may be something we want to add as a topic for this group is coordinating with the rest of the West to make sure that everyone where resources are committed. Make sure that we're not overly counting.
All right, thank you, Steve. Let me move on to, so thank you very much, everyone, for contributing to that discussion. Let me move on to, yes? Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Christopher McLean, California Energy Commission staff. I'll just second Steve's point on, looking at the broader regional picture. I think in addition to, what the CAISO deals with as a BA and setting the rules for how LRAs operate, it also has visibility to how WEIM participants are positioning themselves. It has information from resource efficiency testing in the WEIM process. And even further to that, on the outage picture, as the RC, it has visibility into wider area outage information. And I think certainly the CAISO will have to contemplate how it incorporates that information and shares it and what can be shared. But keeping that wide area view, I think, is important.
Thanks, Chris.
Jeff, I have.
Yeah.
Chris Devin with Terragen. So I just want to highlight more about the internal CAISO structure and California RA structure. And I think that this issue about needing to increase the non-RA is a symptom of the structure of the California RA overall. And I think a lot of the things that we've done at California ISO and the CPC and the structure being a monthly program, things related to planned outage obligations that Bell and Middle River Power have raised, also rain and forced outage placement, all of those things go into what creates these non-RA resources to be not shown for RA, but maybe under contract. So I think I would recommend that we focus on some of these broader structural elements and how those could be fixed, changed, and updated, as opposed to doing something along the lines of command and control, where CAISO says we need to know what's on, under contract but not shown for RA, and so you have to tell us there's some kind of survey or something like that. I would suggest that that would be the wrong way to go about this, and it would be better to try to fix some of these other structural elements that actually result in this outcome where we don't have into the non-shown RA contracted resources.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Hey, let me ask a follow-up question to that. So are you suggesting that fixing some of these issues will increase the visibility, or are you suggesting that the need for that visibility goes away if you fix some of these issues?
It will increase the visibility because there will be less incentive to hold stuff back if you can fix some of these other problems that we've created over the long developed, processes that we have now baked into the process that are, I think, a lot of these things seem like they've been discussed, but that are intractable problems like the POSO thing and others with related to some of the stuff that it's all tied into, I think, some of the things related to seasonal RA versus monthly RA showings. And a lot of those things that are very, I think, structural fundamental elements that are maybe really hard to change are things that I think we should put on the table to at least discuss how they impact things, as opposed to just, like I was saying before, maybe going down the path of suggesting that folks just need to, provide more showings to the ISO of some nature. And in that way, we can use incentives to properly get the outcomes that we want.
Great. So that sounds consistent with my interpretation of what you just said is that's consistent with deprioritizing, but prioritizing some of the other issues you mentioned higher.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's the bottom line. I think it's I would say deprioritize this as being a specific goal, but those other areas that we should bubble up to the surface would help address this symptom.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then we just had a comment on WebEx here from Bible, this public generating tool, just saying that PGP would like to echo these comments, noting that this should not be reported on as a means to count on it to fill dysfunctional components of the CPUC program. The RA program should be reliable upstream of these resources.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Good discussion. And I guess I should probably mention now, so we do have, there are a couple of people who are keeping track of, what's been said, taking notes in a sense, and we'll boil that down. So when we wrap up discussion on one of these items, unless there's a specific takeaway, a specific action item or takeaway for the ISO or for me, you can assume / trust that the conversation's been captured and that we will summarize it and discuss it, and it will work its way into either the issue documents or the next discussion. So thank you. So let's so I'm going to pick another one of these topics. Oh yes, please go ahead.
This is Parth Novak with the ISO. Yeah, so like I appreciate the conversation. There's some questions asked earlier into sort of why the ISO included that. So I thought I'd provide a little bit of perspective on sort of to me, there's sort of two time components to this. There's sort of the planning, modeling, visibility, like I think, which is really kind of what the problem statement we're in right now, which is how do we provide really effective, transparent, timely, actionable information around sort of where we're at from the reliability perspective. It is into some of our perspectives. Part of providing that type of assessment is really understanding what are the resources available, what's under contract. Obviously, there's a variety of issues, certain that are under contract. They might not be on the supply plan. They might not, other attributes might not be fully visible to us. There's probably a set of questions and discussions. How do you have effective modeling in light of those resources? I'll defer to Aditya to talk a little bit about some of our processes later. So then there's kind of a separate question. I think you all were going operational in terms of we might have a participating generator with a source in our BA. I think it's pointed out. Don't know under contract to some other party what's are and other entities. So probably two different timings. I think that visibility comes up. I think some people are sort of more focusing operational program, kind of an equal question that might come up in the discussion forward on modeling. How do we have a full, how do we have a full picture of what the is? I think Brian effectively agree that we're sort of having RA resources targets we're shooting for. But where are from reliability? Dovetail modeling. That's kind of, at least from my perspective, I was thinking. I thought it was why we. Thanks for.
We might need to get closer to the microphones here on the panel. So hopefully we'll be able to hear. But if there's no questions in the room, we do have one online.
Okay, great. Let's do that.
So let's move to Greg Klatt with Douglas Little and Klatt. Go ahead. And then producer, could you unmute Greg's line?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what you said, that some speakers need to be really mindful of the location of the mic. When it cuts in and out, it makes it very difficult to follow the comments that are being made. So two things: one, distance from mic, and both the location of the mic with reference to where your mouth is facing, because otherwise it just makes it very, very uncomfortable to try to follow what's being said.
Great, thank you. Arthur, you have a comment on mic logistics?
Yeah, it is important. Obviously, we have a significant amount of the participants are online. And so like they have them, if they're not hearing what we're saying, then we're not having a very effective working group. So I wanted to make sure maybe, yeah, please jump in with more feedback if this is better or worse, it might be in the chat if you're not hearing it, because, yeah, obviously it's undermining our goal of the working group in this hybrid format. So thanks for that feedback. Maybe someone could give a comment on, was this better for me, and could they hear this more clearly online?
Sounds better online already.
Sybil says it's better, so you've got a thumbs up already. Good. All right, let's move on to a different topic, and thank you again for the discussion on visibility. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the multi-year RA aspect of this, and we have two different sides to that, and I would love to hear from WPTF if they have a representative online. There a little bit more detail around their thoughts on supporting a multi-year RA, and then, and I apologize to NCPA for getting called twice, but you are on the other side of this, so I would love to hear both sides, and then we can have some more discussion. So is there someone from WPTA, or excuse me, WPTF that would like to speak to the multi-year RA issue and their comments on that?
All right. Let's see Callie Wells from Gridwell.
Okay, I think those might be the same thing.
Okay, then Callie Wells.
Hi, Callie.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Hi, that's okay. This is Callie Wells with WPTF. Yeah, happy to chime in here a little bit more on the multi-year RA. So one of the things that we've kind of observed over the past decade is resources, and this kind of ties into the CAISO's ability to designate RMR resources, right? You can only look out 1 year ahead. And so the idea is, because there's this gap in the RMR authority, if you had a multi-year construct, that might also help enable, or not enable, but help resources that might be needed 2 or 3 years out to actually be seen and not retire, and help them realize, okay, maybe this year I don't retire because I know I'm needed a couple of years out. And it kind of helps with a little bit more orderly economic retirement of resources, was kind of the thinking around that. And then also, obviously, these are, being consistent with what we've been saying in the CPUC paradigm, as well as they're going through their RA proceedings. As if, obviously, if there's multi-year over there, then it kind of makes sense also for the CAISO to consider a multi-year program.
Okay. Thank you, Callie. Hey, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question just for clarification. So I can see this two ways, or perhaps two aspects to it. One is having a multi-year requirement, and the other is LSCs choosing to contract, to engage in multi-year contracts without a multi-year requirement, but they know that they're going to have a showing. They're going to have a showing in year 2 and year 3 anyway. So my question to you is, do you have some observations or an opinion on whether or not we're seeing sufficient out-year contracting, and not for new builds, but for existing in your retirement scenario? Is there something that is maybe prohibiting or dissuading LSDs from doing multi-year contracting without a multi-year requirement? Or is it, and if you're not seeing that, I'm assuming the multi-year requirement is to spur the multi-year contracting. But do you have any observations on that?
Yeah, I personally don't have, I would say, a broad visibility into that. So if other people are willing to chime in on that, I'd love to hear, from the people actually engaging in the contracting, what's going, if they're seeing something along those lines. But this is, more to encourage and incentivize those contracts, not the long-term new resource builds, obviously, as you said, but kind of more of the short-term ones to look a couple of years out, so that we can help fill this gap of resources, retiring because they're not on an RA contract for this year or this coming year, and CAISO does an RMR, but, to fill that gap and that need a little bit more efficiently and effectively. So yeah, if
okay.
Somebody else is willing to chime in on your question, I'd love to hear that information as well.
Okay, thank you, Callie.
We also have NCPA online.
Fantastic.
So Mike, go ahead. Mike, your line is unmuted now. You may be on double mute, maybe on your device.
This is Mike Whitney with NCPA. As far as the multi-year RA, NCPA doesn't explicitly oppose it. We do try to contract out multiple years with the RA product, but just due to the nature of the RA programs and pretty frequent changes and adjustments, it makes it pretty difficult to transact out more than a year at a time once we're confident that the rules have been set and we can get all the contracts dialed in ahead of time. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Martha.
Sure, and I'd be interested in hearing more about your all's perspectives as well, at least on the multi-year RA topic and some of the comments we received. It's more just a question for those folks, is that for me, there's probably one conversation around providing information, and that like what are there concerns around sort of timely information, how the studies are structured, the data and the inputs. That's sort of one question. And there's a maybe some sort of presumptive, like at least how I read the comments of like, oh, are we going to be setting up a multi-year RA framework at the ISO that has forward showing requirements, and that might have very different impact to contracting. So to me, those are two very different topics. I certainly don't think, at least for my part, that we were thinking about the latter, that having something that looks like a forward RA timeline. Obviously, the working group process, wanting to make sure that we hear your feedback and discussions. But when we were teeing up those issues, I don't think we were thinking about it in terms of changing the requirements, timelines, showing process at CAISO, but more from the visibility and space. So yeah, if there's any perspectives on that distinction, yeah, I'd certainly like from either from the people who commented or others on, yeah, maybe more on the modeling space. And again, I'm more teeing up at DPA. He's going to get into a lot. We have our presentations coming later, and a lot of sort of his leadership in this area, our thoughts around that. But yeah.
Thank you, Partha. And so really, it's just a matter of visibility to the ISO if there are multi-year RA contracts. Is that kind of the punchline?
I think this is more feedback that we heard from participants via the comment. Okay. And so like it seems that even the people who opposed, to me it was unclear what they opposed. Like I read it as what they opposed was a multi-year RA structure at the ISO with showing requirements, et cetera, and having something that looked akin to that, as opposed to, but I don't know, DT, if you wanted to.
Yeah, Noah.
Hi, Noah Tong from Middle River Power. I think this goes back to what's the problem we're trying to solve, right? With respect to the ISO and modeling, certainly it would be helpful for the ISO to know what contract. Sorry, microphone is playing tricks on me here. And I think overall, maybe the first step into this particular process is to figure out what the ISO needs with regards to a set of resources, portfolio, to ensure reliability, regardless of contracted. Right. If you set that up on a multi basis to understand what 1 in 10 loss of load requirements need to be, then you can work backwards on here's what we got as we go year to year, and see whether or not we're ISO viable.
We do have a hand raised online, Tribal with Public Generating Pool. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Sybil with PGP. This topic raises sort of a broader process question for me as a non-California participant in this discussion. I was wondering if the someone from CAISO staff could, or maybe later in the scope in some of the background materials, if we could include some background on clarifying the roles and responsibilities between the CAISO and the CPUC in terms of the program design and implementation. Because I always thought that I think, PGP, given that our members are mostly RAP participants, would definitely support the concept of a multi-year RA, forward procurement type process that aligns better with the other regional program that's out there. But I'm not, I understood that to be with sort of under the CPUC jurisdiction as opposed to the CAISO implementation end of it. And so if someone could elaborate a bit to clarify sort of the roles and responsibilities and what that implicates for the scope of this initiative, that would be really helpful from my perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much for the comment. And I think in the last couple of meetings, I've noticed the conversation has meandered into places where there's this big intersection between the CPUC's I don't want to say intersection and responsibilities. The responsibilities are distinct, but the topics intersect. And so we've covered that ground, and it sounds like better defining that landscape and the distinction between the two might be something that would be good to cover under the RA 101 umbrella in some sense. Yep, go ahead, Partha.
Yeah, maybe I have two comments and a question back. One would be, so I think part of the materials for 101 sounds right. Aditi is going to cover some of this within his presentation coming up in about an hour, so we'll get into, so I think that's probably maybe the right time to have follow-up questions, clarifications. We recognize the fact that it's very complex, so we probably won't get into all the levels of detail. But yeah, please follow up to the questions at that time. I'd be interested in just asking back, Sybil, I want more information from you maybe on sort of what's, could you provide sort of more details on sort of the alignment with the West and the programs? I assume you're talking about some of the processes RAP, so I don't know if you'd be willing to sort of discuss a little bit about sort of discussing your position and sort of why you think that we could be better in alignment through the changes you're recommending.
Yeah, I am not actually a RAP expert. Now that it's in implementation, that's not an area that PGP is super engaged in. But I will say that, one thing that we highlighted in our comments is that we think it's really important. There's a distinction between resource adequacy, which we think of as a sort of longer term, is the steel in the ground type concepts, versus resource efficiency, which is more of a shorter term concept. And in the EDAM framework, the broader stakeholder, the market design, has sort of defined sufficiency in the day-ahead context. But then there's this sort of intermediate ground that I think those two things interact, which is in the sort of midterm timeline when you're in sort of program implementation within an operating year and a shorter term time horizon, assuming that the resources are there and built. And so I think it's been highlighted and observed, I think that there are some concerns that the CPUC program is maybe not sufficiently meeting an adequacy standard that was highlighted under, I think, the sub-issue 3, which we sort of put in the upstream category that others were referring to in the prior discussion of it. If you sort of fix the upstream issue of making sure that the program is truly providing an adequate fleet, then some of these downstream issues become hopefully less critical, less challenging, because you have enough resources. You know, there. I guess I would just say, you know, again, referring back to our comments, we'd like to just sort of try to be clear with the language in this process. How do we differentiate between adequacy, which is further upstream, and the issues that are related to that, versus something that's, you know, further in the weeds in the program implementation and then down into the sufficiency time frame, where it's really, you know, into the very short term from our perspective. Thanks.
So this is a Partha again from the ISO. Thanks for that clarification. That's really helpful. And obviously, I think that the definitions and the words we use are, you know, critical to understanding. Often, I think, just from my perspective, often when we're talking about resource adequacy, you know, there's obviously different time horizons, and that, you know, within the context of, you know, both the PUC as well as the ISO's processes, often there are sort of annual and monthly time horizons, certain showing obligations and processes that are occurring. That's often sort of tightly referred to as sort of the resource adequacy processes. To me, to your point, you know, these things, you know, from what I would describe as lowercase resource adequacy, these often extend into, you know, the planning horizon, the IRP processes we have, and trying to make sure that these are coordinated and well aligned, going from the forward time horizon on into the, you know, you're looking at sort of 5 years out, 1 year out monthly, and on into the operational space. You know, almost assuring that each of those processes are working effectively in alignment is important. I think that's what you're getting at. So yeah, really appreciate the feedback and response there. So thanks, Sybil.
Thank you, Sybil.
We do have a hand raised online.
Okay, great.
So Kyle Navis with Cal Advocates.
I'm obviously the Public Advocate's Office at the CPUC. I did want to echo a bit some of Sybil's comments here about the usefulness of being able to distinguish between the roles that we're talking about, particularly when it comes to RA, for the CAISO, and then also not just the CPUC, but all local regulatory authorities in the CAISO that run their RA program. So I do think that's something we commented on. It shows up in a couple slides, so I won't belabor the point. And then one other thing that I did want to highlight here that I don't really see on this slide, and we didn't address this in our comments, but the energy sufficiency evaluation component of slice of day, we saw that as a trend in comments. Maybe that would go under PRM, but it is something that I think this slide would benefit from having on it.
Okay, thank you. All right. Let's move on. So we have, for this part of the discussion, sort of tentatively felt that you know, moving through to about 10:30 would be appropriate and give Aditya enough time, hopefully enough time to, because I looked at your slides. I don't know if hours is enough time, my friend. There could be so those can generate some good discussion. So let's cover one more topical area from problem statement 1. So we did talk about the PRM last time a little bit, and I know that's the big issue, and I suspect we're going to talk about it or possibly have a presentation on it at some point in the future. But last meeting, we didn't really talk too much about reevaluating the counting rules, and that came up in the comments. So I would love to hear a little bit more and get some discussion going for the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes on that. So CPUC just chimed in. Maybe if Middle River doesn't mind, again, commenting on the accounting rules, if that's all right. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Noah Tom from Middle River Power. So yeah, for us, PRM is a huge aspect of reliability, and it's mainly a calculation formula that is derived from the. And so in order to adjust the plan reserve margin, also have to ensure that the accounting rules are reflected that number. So you can either sort of solve and peg the PRM value and solve for the accounting rules, or vice versa, because they inter.
Okay. Yeah, Brian?
Yeah, Jeff Bryan, thank you with Middle River. Let me just simplify and tweak those comments a little. I mean, the way we look at this framework, you start with a loss of load expectation analysis that has a portfolio. If you've done that analysis right, you get a system that gets you to 0.1 LOLE. That's the right foundational starting point. But then the question is, well, how do you make sure that that fleet or reliability equivalent fleet gets procured? And that's where the PRM and the accounting rules, which is, there is no hard and fast rule that they have to be X or Y or Z. But at the end of the day, they have to work together, the accounting rules and the PRM, to ensure that a fleet that's, at least from a reliability standpoint, equivalent to the fleet that got you to 0.1 is procured. That seems foundational to the program. But again, it doesn't say that thou shalt set the accounting rules this way, but it says all these things have to work together to get the resources secured that will get you to 0.1.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me ask a follow-up question. So there are and have been efforts underway, if I'm not mistaken, that address accounting rules. So where are we short now in having addressed accounting rules that we need to look at?
Well, I think there's still some question about the foundation,
Okay.
which is, are we crystal clear or completely sure that we've done the analysis to know what portfolio we need to get to 0.1? So I think, at least in Middle River's mind, there's some cloudiness about it.
Okay.
But then the question is, how do we have confidence in the accounting rules and the PRM to know that they will set up the requirements that you need to get a fleet that gets you to 0.1?
Okay. Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to comment or have a discussion or take the other side of we need to address accounting rules? I know that the CPUC had included some comments on that as well. If they'd like to chime in, they're welcome to.
We do have a couple folks online.
Great.
All right. Callie Wells, go ahead. Event producer, could we unmute Callie Wells? Adrian? Let me know if there's difficulty unmuting Callie Wells, but maybe we'll come back to her in a second. Let's go to Bonnie Blair. All right, we might have some muting issues online, so let's look back in the room and we'll get this fixed.
Yeah, Chris.
I guess I'll try to fill some time here. Chris Devon, Terragen. So I do agree with kind of the way that Brian and I have been describing this, and I think maybe to tie it into the slice a day discussions, seems to me that the way CAISO has, at least so far, said that they were going to maybe look at the different, values that are provided from these slice a day counting rules, and how that is used in their validation and compliance with the overall, going requirements and such, lends to me to ask some questions about, how are we going to really relying on those resources throughout the whole day, and do those things align with the way that CAISO is looking at it? So I would say that to me, there's some question about, if you look at, for instance, the CAISO's resource adequacy and supply stack on the website, it shows the net RA and all those renewables that, might be really low output levels and potentially very low qualifying capacity levels being shown during the evening peak period. Those do provide a lot of quote unquote RA value throughout the whole day that may be a lot different. And so I just think some discussion of how all of that contributes to reliability in general, not just only on those single peak hour periods, but across the entire day, across the entire month, is worth, talking about reevaluating, maybe not necessarily the counting rules, but what does it mean for the CAISO as far as efficiency goes and what the operators can rely on and those sort of things. So just wanted to throw that perspective in here.
Okay, thank you, Chris. How are we doing with the unmuting?
So let's try this again. Can we unmute Callie Wells' line on WebEx? Okay. Callie put in the chat, at least we'll work with the chat. So Callie said, I was just going to include the need to review the CAISO's default counting rules and ensure they align in the way Middle River Power articulates. So I'll keep working on this unmute function. We have a couple hands raised online.
Hopefully we can resolve the issue with the mics, and if not, if we can't do that expeditiously, I'd recommend folks including their comments in the chat and respond to them in that manner. To me, like the issues on counting rule, I think that there's a couple of different ways, and I think that this sort of would apply to this problem statement one. And I think the first one I think that's been alluded to was back to our default. Our default counting rules and our default PRM that would include in the tariff, and that's really not a, to reiterate, it's not a minimum, it's not the requirement set, but this is basically the default rules. If it's not included by the APCO LLC. The second thing, at least in terms of the discussion part on the counting rules, is I think that there is some overlap to the later topics. I think there's a question I think that Chris sort of teases up right, is like some of the questions is how would these be applied within our various processes under our tariff? And there's, I think there's open questions from parties of like, would this affect how you backstop? Would this affect sort of the processes for substitution obligations and for those type of elements? And so I think there's to me, an open question for discussion on, if we developed or came to sort of what I would describe as sort of consistent ways to count and look at those resources within the ISO's program, how would that affect those processes? I think as well, I think this is really maybe getting at that problem statement 3. To me, there's kind of open question on the degree that we are refining within our processes the way we count and look at resources. How might that affect cost allocation under various processes within the ISO's program? And so to me, those were kind of the overlapping issues with sort of the counting rules I think, Chris, that you were alluding to. But maybe I'll stop there and see if I see Steve Keen, you have your hand raised. So yeah, if nothing else, I'll stop at that.
No, thank you. Thanks, Partha. Yeah, Steve, go ahead, and then we'll, when Steve's done, unless there are some pressing comments, we'll probably move on because I want to make sure that we give enough time to DJ.
Steve Keen from Edison. I'm glad to hear what you said. I think this issue to me is kind of rolled in with how the CAISO determines whether there is resource adequacy. And I think what's been going on at least the last 10 years with the change in the fleet has really required there to be changes in how you do your analysis of whether there are sufficient reasons. You know, because, and, you know, the first attempt at that, I think, was with the LCCs and attempting to figure out how do you count what a solar generator or a wind generator can deliver. And, you know, back when they were a small part of the fleet, yeah, you know, it was important to start looking at it, but it wasn't critical. We're now at a point where they're a big enough part of our fleet that it's a critical thing to look at. And I think now what we're seeing now is kind of the next wave coming in with its, which is storage. And, you know, storage is, I believe last year it played a critical part in keeping the lights on during some of those periods. As more and more storage comes online, it's going to become even more important. But then storage is a very different element than, very different type of resource than generators. It needs to be looked at very differently to make sure that it's going to be there, has enough energy in it to make sure it can actually generate. So I think, yeah, I think we do need to I think the CAISO needs to look at the whole thing. And the counting thing is tied with how do you know, determine the reliability of the grid. And you know, the CAISO already recognized that. As Chris said, you know, when you look on your daily outlook page, when you look at that, you know, 7-day lookout for RA resources, it doesn't just show peak demand and RA resources. You already put on there the net peak demand and the net RA resource. So it's getting, you know, it's obviously there. You're obviously recognizing it's something we need to look at, and I think that's going to be a critical part of this discussion. And I think you have to go back because it's also how you would examine the reliability. I mean, one of the things I think that would be helpful to a lot of people is when you do that analysis, so when you get the monthly or the annual RA numbers, and you look at that and you determine that we need to backstop. At least for me, I know it's kind of a black box. And I think when you actually backstopped for shortages, August, that was the first time I can remember that ever happening. And, you know, what I was thinking is, okay, I have no idea, like, how short were you? What were you seeing that suddenly made this month be the one where you actually had to go out and backstop compared to other months? I think some information on things like that and how, you know, when you're looking at that, how maybe you're changing the way you're doing it. Because in the past, I think, you know, it was probably just that looking at the peak and looking at what you had, and no problem. But now I imagine that it's changed. You've added local into it. You've added, you know, there's a whole bunch of other things you're not looking at. So it would really help us to know how the ISO is actually looking at that and how that's changed maybe over the last few years and how you anticipate it changing over the next 5 years or 10 years.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Steve. We could maybe have some level setting as well when we get into some of the problem statement too, in terms of how our programs are operated. Like what I would describe is that obviously, like, we're focusing a little more here on the, you know, the modeling conversation, the information transparency, and, you know, well, say like really our current RA structure is not built on, it's really built around the information provided strictly by LRAs and by LS systems, accounting rules that they use under their various processes. Basically, sort of directly applied from those information to our processes. So it might be a very different conversation in terms of involving sort of different aspects of how our program works. But to me, it's a little bit of a separate conversation, but to your point, very overlapping as well.
Yeah, and I mean, my assumption has always been, yeah, I realize you're looking at like what you're getting from the LRAs or the LSCs, but I always assumed that you were also looking at stuff that, you know, you would know that they may not. So the locational aspects of some of this stuff, a lot of it's coming from behind one constraint or something. You know, to some extent, the characteristics of some of the plants. They have you know, if they're use limited, depending on how use limited they are. Various things like that where, you know, you would know that, but possibly the LSEs don't. And you might know that from, you're the one entity that deals not only with the LRA and LSE side, but also with the generator side. You know what restrictions are on generators. I always assumed that at least you had a little more knowledge and were able to put that to use when you were determining whether you were going to backstop, that you were using that. So that understanding how that worked might also then help the LRAs figure out how to put together their requirements.
No, that's really good feedback, and I think Aditya could get into that a little bit. I know we're taking your time right now, Aditya, so by responding, but yeah, it's a great question. I think we can get into a little bit about, and like obviously within the context of like our backstop processes, a variety of different, you know, there's probably 6 different categories of like our CPM processes that might have different bases and information. And yeah, so I think you're right on. Maybe we can get into some of those details as we progress, both in Aditya's discussion as well as in, you know, which is probably more focused on that modeling aspect of like that program design aspect.
Great. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, Noah.
Yeah, sorry.
Really quickly, because I'd like to.
Visceral reaction here. So I think overall the reliance, with regards to the ISO, the reliance on RA programs and the inability here to, the reliability aspect of that is probably a big component that we try to understand. The implicit assumption that LRA programs are reliable to begin.
Thank you, Noah. All right, let's move on. I'm just going to forward through to the first set of slides for Aditya's presentation. Yes.
I would offer too, this is probably, I recognize that we probably have some technical difficulties that prevented people. I want to make sure that we have a chance. It might be after, we'll have some time. To me, we have a pre-packed agenda. I'd offer, I really want to make sure that those people are heard, and so maybe we can circle back to them. And like, this won't be obviously the last time that people have the opportunity to provide comments and feedback on this. So yeah, I just want to make sure that people who weren't able to speak, you know, recognize that we'll make sure that there's additional time, you know, both here and next week. But
so I appreciate you saying that. I was thinking about that earlier in terms of, since time's sliding, and we should have just anticipated that was going to happen because it always happens. Since the focus is going to be on problem statement 1, you know, we can eat into just covering the participant feedback on problem statements 2 and 3. And we can eat into that if we need to. I think the conversation's been great about problem statement 1 issues, so we should stay focused on that, and we can be, you know, dynamic and move things around. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
And
this works sometimes.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, you might have to point it at the screen or up. But we'll remind folks in the room and our panelists to get as close to the microphone as possible.
One second.
Caitlin, is it fair to assume that folks on the WebEx can actually hear us, right? That's a fair assumption.
I think we're good right
Okay.
now,
Okay.
and I'm watching the chat. I might flag you down if I hear anyone complaining about the audio.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably start off by sharing a personal story before we get into this. I know we are short on time, but I think this is important to make the point. I think it was summer of 2006. I just finished my undergraduate program, and I was about to start my master's here in Missouri. I went to a robotics competition, 4 or 5 days robotics. You learn about different things, and then you make something in the last 2 days, and then you have an exhibition on the last day. And my team developed a birthday robot or something where it basically you have a doll that goes around in the park and then it stops when the birthday boy goes and touches the thing. So that's where the cake thing happens. That's our vision. We did not deliver any of that, but it was, we got there partly, but then the panel that judges came around and one of the judges asked me, as you developed this, what were the challenges that you faced? And then I went on and on. The ICs did not work. This thing broke, that thing broke. The soldering was not good. We had a power cut and so many issues. Then he takes a deep breath and says, hey, what do you think about the folks that send rockets to outer space? And I'm like, oh, that's super complicated. It can't be easy. And I don't know how people do it. Da, 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 da. And then he took me to the side and explained, hey, everything is basically made up of resistance, inductors, and capacitors. It's a bunch of those things put together make an IC. Bunch of those things put together make a specific function, and all of these small modules put together make a rocket. If you think of it as a rocket, then it will be super confusing if you don't know what is happening. But if you think of it as simple modules, then it becomes a lot easier. I think same is the case with our KISO RA program. There's so many things happening with RA sufficiency, showings, must offer obligation, programs with the LRA, programs here, and trying to bring all of that together might seem like a rocket, but I think we will try and break it down into modules and focus on one thing at a time and hopefully get to a rocket that actually goes to the outer space and we have a fully decent program in the end. So the way I've broken up these slides is to talk about RA modeling in 3 different buckets. Basically, talk about what happens currently, talk about the gaps, and then talk about our suggestions for future RA modeling, and then get into more discussion. All of these are suggestions. So by the time we get to that slide, we can think about how to implement it and how to make it better. So, all right, so reliability modeling today, I want to define resource adequacy as we see it. Resource adequacy is a construct that is developed to ensure that there'll be enough resources to serve electric demand in all but extreme conditions. So we're not really planning for extreme events and extreme conditions, but you want to have a resource adequate environment in most all possible scenarios. So as Chris pointed out earlier, in California, it's a shared RA landscape. It sits between the CPUC and the LRAs in the state of California. Then you have KISO, then you have CEC setting the load forecasts. And then the CPUC jurisdictional LSCs, this is important. They talk about 90% of the load in the KISO balancing area authority. And then I want to say it out here, long-term resource planning is the responsibility of the LRA. So we are not trying to mix things here. It's basically saying this regulatory landscape exists like that, but the lens through which KISO views at the resource adequacy is in terms of reliability. Do we have enough resources available to ensure reliability across all time horizons? I think, hold on to that thought because I think that becomes the theme of the presentation. So a little bit more color on what I mean by responsibilities are shared. We ask about how much is needed. That is the requirements determination part. Then how do we get it? Procurement and showings. Here's what we have. That's what the LSCs demonstrate. Then do we have enough? That's the assessment part. And then is it available when needed? And that's the availability and performance incentives and all of that. So multiple parties play their roles and it all comes together here. And current components of KISO's RA process, right? It starts with the analysis phase where you do a local capacity study, you have a flex capacity study to determine different requirements, you have a reliability study, you have summer assessment to get a sense of do we have enough going into the summer. Then you have demonstrations, that is annual for 90% of the load, and you have monthly for all of that load forecast. Availability performance requirements, MOO, bid insertion, and RAIM, or staffer obligation for all these RA resources. Then you have availability incentive mechanisms. And if we don't have enough, which is determined in the backstop procurement, you have CPM to procure more, and then you have RMR process to extend the life of certain resources. This is intended to kind of lay the landscape, so I'm not going to go into all the details. This certainly has a lot of components in this, but basically starts with LRA establishing a procurement obligation. The various LSEs and suppliers demonstrate their showings. LRA looks at it and then does its studies. If it's short, it has LRA penalties, and then it's all shown to the CAISO. CAISO then looks at it and does a sufficiency assessment, and then if you have short, and you have a CPM, and then cost allocation. So basically trying to ensure enough resources are there. Quickly again, annual showings assessment. This is important. The reason I put it here is when we talk about modeling, it kind of helps give that context. By September, the year-end requirements are finalized. Then by November, CAISO makes any deficiency determinations. December, may procure backstop CPM based on the annual showings assessment part. And then you have monthly showings. It's 100% of monthly LRA, RA requirements. Two components. One is the CEC's IPER coincident gross peak load forecast, and then you use the LRA's determined planning reserve margins in that evaluation. Then you take all of that information, and then in the summer assessment, you stack those resources, and then you do a deterministic stack analysis. Basically, NQCs of all these resources are stacked up, look at the planning reserve margin, do we have enough, do we not have enough, and then make a comparison that way. And yes, you make assumptions on imports, make assumptions on different resources. This is done at 8 p.m., so there's no solar assumed. So it's a deterministic assessment is one view going into the summer. Then you have a probabilistic stochastic assessment of the expected summer supply and demand conditions that is performed to address overall progress towards resource planning targets. So the ISO already performs some detailed stochastic modeling to evaluate future supply situations to see if we are on track. Do we have supply excess or deficit in the years? That is an analysis that is done. I think I covered this. In the interest of time, I will move on. And the stochastic production cost model framework is important because we have 4 different zones in how we represent in our Plexus model. Then you have one zone to represent the external footprint of the WEC. 21 zones outside CAISO, and then you represent all the resources within those zones individually, and then you run 500 different simulations, Monte Carlo, and then you determine if you have any loss of load. If you have loss of load, how many cases, what excess capacity is needed, then you calculate, go through that standard LOLE process of determining shortfalls. So that is a very quick high level of what happens today. Everybody does their part. It's brought to the ISO. We measure, we see, we calculate, and then we go into the different pieces, right? Then what is problem statement 1 highlighting? I saw unanimous support in this kind of additional, consistent, transparent, timely information on the sufficiency of the fleet. How do we bring that information is one thing that we've heard consistently. And as we've heard in the past, this is more important to really look at what we have and what we will have in the future, because most of the resources are going to be weather dependent, variable energy resources. You have a lot of solar, wind, and storage being a bigger part of your resource fleet. So do we have enough? And then translating that capacity megawatts to energy sufficiency throughout is an important exercise that needs to be done. I'd probably pause here. I think this is a good pause point.
Christopher McLean, California Energy Commission staff. It seems like in the most recent summer assessment paradigm, there maybe was a shift to the Plexus modeling you described versus in prior years, there was a little bit different approach, I think also leveraging Plexus, but with a different model and pushing more at a kind of raw combinatorics stochastic estimation. Is CAISO looking at both of those still? Do you still look at that raw stochastics run, or are you more relying on kind of the system model proper to the extent that the new Plexus model is a representation?
So both Plexus models were in existence for a period of time. The one that we discontinued last year or this year is the operational risk assessment, because there was a lot of confidential information that was incorporated into that model, which was getting difficult to share. And then we had to, trust me, these are the numbers which I want to get away from. So this is more in that space. So
to the extent the more confidential one still has value to operators and planners internal to the ISO, it could be a tool that you could choose to use but couldn't disclose. Are you saying you're moving away from that entirely?
Yeah, that was the plan. And you can revisit that if that is of importance based on how these conversations go, but that is where our initial inclination is. Please.
Steve Keen from Edison. I heard you talking about there's like 3 different periods. So there's the year ahead assessment, there's a month ahead assessment, and then there's a summer assessment, which is a fairly new one. And this is not really an RA assessment. I understand how it feeds in, but I'm wondering if you kind of glossed over like what's done in the annual assessment. And I know the CAISO has the authority to backstop on an annual basis. I don't believe it's ever done it. And then when you get to the month ahead, again, you have the ability to backstop, but it's only been used, that I can remember, once. I'm just wondering, what the difference is, how you look at that and how you determine, not so much how you do the modeling. So any differences between the two of those would be important, but also then how that information feeds into the decision to do backstop.
The backstop arithmetic is pretty straightforward. It's basically stacking up resources in the monthly showings, requirement, do we have enough, not system-wide surplus, move on, if system-wide deficit, then go back and look at what LRAs don't have enough, and then you book your cost allocation. So that's a pretty standard arithmetic application of the CPM in the month ahead time frame. Are you getting to a specific component of how that process is done, or?
No, I mean, I understand the mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
What I had trouble with is that it's only been used once. So all those other times that, haven't done it, even though from looking at like the penalties that the CAISO has issued for RA, there have been a number of, the PUC, has issued, there have been a number of entities who have been short on RA. and that's, I'm just not, and, you know, for example, like with local RA and showing, PG&E has been, last couple of years, 4,000 megawatts short on that annual showing for local RA, yet it wasn't backstopped. I mean, I think I understand the reasons for that, but I'd like to hear the ISO articulate how is that determined, because PG&E is that short in the PG&E local areas. They're that short on local RA. You know, why wasn't it backstopped?
Yeah, we can bring more discussion on when a CPM is actually triggered, but my understanding is if you're system-wide short, that's when a CPM is triggered. It's not about looking at local, but I can get more information on that process at a future RA. Wrong? Yeah, further?
Well, we can get into some of the details. I think right now, I think what you're alluding to, Steve, is that like, right now, I think we're really focusing in on sort of the modeling aspects, sort of how we're going to enhance transparency. I think you have a separate question, which I think is probably better suited at problem statement 2 discussion, just in terms of like, what are the mechanics of our current programs and data? And obviously, right now, it is, you know, we have certain tariff authorities to take action based on specific data, and that, you know, we are basically implementing our tariff with that data. I hear what you're really looking for is a discussion on what does the process look like, what's the information like, and how are we going through those steps. It might be something we can get to a little bit in twice a day discussion next week as well. That might be a good thing. We're going to have a lot of those sort of corresponding.
And you've triggered something, and yeah, your criticism of my comment was exactly spot on. But let me then change it is, in terms of the modeling, in the year ahead, as pointed out, you know, you're not getting a full showing necessarily. You're getting 90% of the summer months and all of the local and some of the 90% of the flex. When you do that modeling, how do you do that modeling as opposed to what you're doing in the month ahead, where you have the full showing? Is it exactly the same? And you know, and then I guess then you're right. Then the question is, how do you interpret the results? I guess, how are they interpreted when you don't have necessarily the
So thanks for that clarification. And maybe it's like terminology, because like to me, when I think of this, as a DP correctly described, the stacking exercise that we're doing in the various processes, you know, we have basically certain, you know, I've never described that as modeling. Like obviously, I think that you can allude to the fact that like this is a way that we are using the information provided to us by the LRA and sort of subject to our tariff to determine when we should and shouldn't exercise our backstop authority. Sound like you were wanting additional ability. Are we, you know, what are the basis of when we've actually called CPMs in the past and when we haven't? What does that data look like? So I think we can get into those as well. And there's probably a separate question you can touch on that in terms of like from a modeling and visibility standpoint, what is the information we have available? What will be effective? And have maybe a different discussion around that. I think that they are. But
we do have a couple hands raised online. So let's move to Callie Wells online. Can we unmute her line? All right, you should be unmuted. Let's give it a try.
It worked this time, I think. This is Callie Wells with WPTF. I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Couple of questions actually back on slide 27, just so I can make sure I understand this assessment. So I understand what you're comparing here, but my question is when you do the stack analysis, are these NQC values shown on the monthly showings, or is this just more of capacity on the system?
NQC values.
Of resources that are shown?
No, I don't think this is based on showings. It's basically based on known information that we have. So it's done
Okay.
in March or April for September view.
Okay, gotcha. So it's more of NQC of all resources, not just what's contracted and shown on the RA showings for this month.
Yep.
Okay, that's super helpful. And then my second question is when you kind of break down the imports here, and obviously import assumptions are key. So I see like the dark orange is average level of import RA contracts. So what are you averaging over? Is it like over the months in that year? Is it over historical years?
My understanding is it's the average available for that month historically.
Okay, so you look back historically as to what was actually shown on the RA showings for imports, and then you're taking some sort of average and then a maximum level?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that was it. I just wanted to make sure I understood kind of what each bucket here represented. Thank you.
All right. We also have Grant Glazer on the line. All right, Grant, looks like you want to, you unmuted.
Everyone hear me?
Go ahead, Grant. I think we heard you for a second there.
Okay, great. I'll keep going. Let me know if you can't. This is Grant Glazer with Emanate Energy. Couple of questions on slide 30. So first, I was curious, is this the same model that CAISO is using to count capacity for NQC determinations?
Nope. That is a different process.
Okay. Do you mind briefly explaining how that process happens, or where I should look to learn more about that process?
Would defer to somebody else to phone a friend. Do you know if Caitlin is online?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
my own suggestion is that that is a lengthy discussion that we're going to need to have around sort of how our deliverability studies work and need to evolve. I think there'll be, again, some of that discussion I think will come up in the Slice a Day workshop. I think we also have time scheduled for further follow-up. So my own take is that it's probably just much more of a lengthy conversation. Catalin certainly could weigh in on the question, but I would suggest if you're okay with it, unless there's a specific tie-in to this modeling discussion, maybe we can defer that to a future workshop.
Yeah, I'm happy to defer that question. Then I guess my last question on this slide, or last question, which is also on this slide. So this, and I'm realizing this now might relate to that broader conversation that we're going to defer. Nonetheless, here it looks like you're using 4 CAISO zones and 1 outside zone in this PCM exercise to figure out where or if CAISO is short. And I just was observing that this is, far fewer zones than might be relevant for accurately mapping transmission constraints and zones or subzones within CAISO. And so the question is just generally like, is this lack of zonal resolution a concern that CAISO has in ensuring RA? Or is that not
Yeah, I think we can.
high priority?
Yeah. I guess we can talk about that, Grant. For the purposes of what we were trying to do, system-wide, high-level RA assessment, this representation does a good job, but we can talk about more granularity.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And then we have one more hand raised online. So I will go ahead.
We'll go to that and then come back to no.
Yeah, this is Sybil from PGP. And so in trying to understand the answer to my prior question, sounds like the CAISO is responsible for a lot of analysis and assessments. And so does the CAISO have autonomy to change methodologies in these areas that they're responsible for to improve the analysis or assessment that's being done? Or are there predetermined analytical structures for these that are under the control of the CPUC? Or is it somewhere in the middle there?
This is CAISO's analytics, and the conversations that we will have in this modeling group is to figure out the methods, the models, the data assumptions, and all of that. So yeah, we will have a detailed discussion on all of those pieces. This is,
Okay,
I was
thank
just
you.
sharing what actually happens to date. So to give a lay of the land.
Okay, and so it's within the purview of this group to enhance those processes, and those are strictly under the CAISO realm of control.
Realm of visibility.
Okay, well, continue. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in hearing more about your question. I think that like we're getting to this a little later. Like obviously we have a lot of we have folks from the CPUC calling in. We have folks from the CEC here. We recognize there's a lot of work happening in their venue in terms of modeling and transparency. I think we're getting to a lot of discussions, but there's a lot of folks in our comments who express interest in making sure that we're aligned and coordinated with those entities. I think that, at least from my part, I think that's a big part of the discussion that we'll likely have going forward as we get into the details is how do we ensure like the, data inputs, assumptions, the granularity of our models are consistent. And, if they're not, I think the one of the big pushes that folks have is really wanting to make sure that we have transparency around that. So for me, at least, I think of it less as just a strict jurisdictional question as much as it is just a desire for everybody to be in alignment. So like that's at least my take on sort of how it might go, how that coordination might happen. But
Thanks, Bata.
No, it's on Middle River Power. So the year ahead, month ahead production cost model, I'm not aware of until today, I think. It's mainly the summer reliability assessment that I'm more familiar with. So can you talk about whether or not in the previous year ahead analyses has the ISO found different PRM that's required to manage the 0.1 LOLE than the 18.5% or the 15, 17?
So in the year ahead, I don't think we calculated the planning reserve margin. We basically said, is the resource sufficient to meet the 1 day in 10 target, or do we have excess capacity to get to that 1 day in 10? If the probability is, let's say, 0.01, how do we get to 0.1 by increasing load or by taking generation out? And you're trying to calculate what is that level. So that is where this reserve was giving us an information on the resource mix collectively, and its ability to meet the reliability target was assessed. It was not assessing the ELCC of resources or a planning reserve margin. It basically, you put everything together and run these simulations. Do you get to 0.1?
Right, but in the, generally speaking, LLE analysis. Entire fleet have surplus. If you have surplus, great, you can get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to reverse
Yep.
it. And so you must be able to determine whether or not you have surplus.
Yes, that is the calculation that
Right.
is done. Yes.
Okay, and then from there you can sort of calculate.
You could,
No?
but then you have to make assumptions on the QCs and NQCs and all of that, ELCC values of resource types to calculate the planning reserve margin, right? So we did not do that part of the exercise. We basically stopped at enough excess, not excess, and then run sensitivities around hydro conditions, run sensitivities on load forecast and known activities that happen in that summer, basically.
Thanks.
Maybe switch your microphone if that could. Oh, okay. Maybe go back. I guess.
Following up, I think on Noah's and my questions from earlier, what's the relationship between stack analysis and production cost modeling? You're ahead and in the month ahead. You actually do a production cost modeling, determine the LOE month ahead, or that?
So maybe I'll say it differently without the slides this time. There are 4 things that happen. One is month ahead RA showings assessment, where we basically say, do we have enough? Then that feeds into CPM and cost allocation. Annual RA showings assessment, again, the same thing, backstop, whatever. And then there is a stack analysis for summer assessment. That is a deterministic view of all resources at the net peak hour of 8 p.m. And then you do a probabilistic assessment of the resources going into the summer. That's also a summer assessment.
The stack analysis and probabilistic
Are part of the summer assessment.
right, but those are not done on RA resources. Those are done on our fleet.
I believe so. Shu Cheng, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is my understanding.
And I guess one question, does that analysis feed into whether you do backstop? Like when you get to the month ahead and you see that you're short, well, is that, because the backstop can be, it's not just necessarily if people are short. I think August was the first time you backstopped for that, but you have backstopped in the past where, you know, there it was estimated that there was a collective shortage or something like that. So I assume that was based on a kind of probabilistic modeling. Okay. Can you explain how you did that?
Yeah, and so we take a crack at it, sure. So yeah, no, it's not placed, like there's, you know, there are 6 different categories that sort of alluded to before in terms of the basis, the sort of categories in which we can do CPM backstop. Most of the time, I think what you're referring to is really the you're talking about the recent events, we're talking about a system deficiency, which really, the mechanics of it, and I'm doing this, ideally we'd have Abdul here to describe sort of the mechanical details, but at a really high level, it was really just a stacking exercise of what was shown and included as an NQC value in our system, and whether or not we had a collective deficiency based on the PRMs set by the LRAs and the resources shown by the entity. That's sort of what would determine if there's a collective deficiency. There's not really a more robust probabilistic analysis that would go into that annual efficiency calculation. And so, yes, that get your point. It's just a really a straight line stacking exercise, not some more granular and complicated. They're calculation and methodology that helps you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the same thing, I think earlier was applied to, the same thing, like, there's a variety of, categories under our tariff, including flex, including local, for almost all these, in terms of the different timelines and processes in which are in place, but almost all these really based on the shown values by the shown values in our system and the requirements set by the element. So it's not even for those other categories, there's not a elaborate analysis. I think that was to your earlier. Thanks, Steve.
Lauren, did you have your card up earlier, or?
I did, but the question was on.
Okay. All right, thanks. Any other questions online? All right, now that we've discussed what actually happens, go ahead.
Christopher McLean, staff, California Energy Commission. So the chart shown on the previous slide, that's an extract from the summer assessment. And if you go to page 4, that I think it's clear that NQCs are being used. So I think earlier, or maybe at least I was confused. It sounded like maybe the response was this was sort of a raw capacity stack, not tied to NQC, but just to make sure and be clear, this is an NQC stack. Is that correct?
Sorry if I misspoke. Yes, but not the shown components. It doesn't have the shown RA parts, but yeah, you use the NQC values.
Helpful. Thank you.
So why now? Why is this more important going in? There is supply side activity, there is demand side activity, there is reliability metrics that are varied. Then you have the roles in the RA space that are shared, right? In supply side, you have varied hit aggressive policy goals, you have tight resource availability, you have the assumptions that the localized resource planning, when put together, meets the system-wide requirement, and that is what we are trying to understand. Is that true? If that is not, then what is our visibility and how do we improve that? On the demand side, you have electrification happening, you have electric vehicles charging, time of use rates, demand response programs. So there is a lot of demand side activity that is happening as well. In reliability metrics, you have various LRAs that use different planning reserve margins, different counting rules in the footprint currently. So there is some that change monthly, there are some that use different numbers, some that use an increasing number, and then you have the slice of day implementation that is happening at the CPUC going forward. So the attempt here is to, how do we bring all of this together? And do we have enough resources at the ISO BAA level to meet all of the resource needs? And so the questions that we are asking are in 3 different time horizons. First is, are the year ahead RA showings adequate? That can be changed based on the conversation this morning. Are there enough resources that are available to the ISO BAA on the year ahead time frame sufficient? So it's the non-RA shown but contracted for CAISO load, that kind of component of the resources, is that sufficient? So we don't have a specific assessment to see if we have sufficient capacity in the year ahead with enough time to cure. And then the next time frame is what's happening in the year 2, 3, 4 time frame. Is there enough level of authorized procurement that is happening in the footprint? We need to get an assessment in that time space to see if there is enough capacity being installed or authorized. And then a longer term view or visibility is another important aspect, trying to figure out, is enough being planned for in the system? We have, like the previous slide shows, you see a lot of new kinds of resources that are weather dependent and extreme weather dependent. And so in that landscape, is it enough kinds of resources being planned for? So then one is the capacity component, and then there is the energy sufficiency component, and then their location aspect. There are so many other things that have to be assessed and studied for the longer term. And the other, my previous planning experience had says, if one part of the system goes through an accelerated decarbonization environment, that is pretty easy to manage, because then you can rely on your neighbors. But if all of your neighbors are also going through similar transformation, fleet transitions, can you rely on your neighbors, and how much can you rely on your neighbors? And that availability, all of those pieces will become critical to understand. With that background, we have a list of a few suggestions by breaking down by question that we would like to have initial conversations today, and then more detailed conversations on a time frame by time frame in future working groups. No?
No, Tom, Middle River Power. Can you just identify whether or not you're getting your head showings from all LRA, LSEs, or simply LSEs? Okay.
The question is, are we getting year-ahead showings from all LRAs?
Sorry, yes. I mean, I guess, is there more detail? I was wondering, like, what's behind your, okay.
Yeah, I think for most of it, programs are pretty well known. It's whether or not, or whether California has similar requirements for a year.
I usually like to have a slide that basically says that it is not a replacement for your obligations with your own LRAs. It's basically a reliability modeling based on 1 day in 10 kind of an assessment to plan if you have sufficient resources, and are we procuring for enough, are we planning for enough to meet reliability across all time horizons is the overarching question. So now let's pause for a second on the year ahead time frame. So the goal of this conversation here is to introduce the objective, assumptions, methodology, tools, process, information, data, time frame of assessment. Everything is an alignment with the CPUC and CEC, all of that for the year ahead. What do we do so we all feel comfortable that we have enough resources going into the year ahead time frame? And so the objective is, are year ahead RA showings adequate? So do we have to focus on RA showings? The answer is not necessarily, but what do we include in here? If RA showings are insufficient, then the year ahead assessment allows for enough time to cure is the expectation. If you have a view of the system going into the year, then it'll help with there is something that can be done, but if in a month ahead, if you show that it's short and then you don't have enough time to cure, is the objective that we are trying to get at. On the assumptions, currently we only get 90% of the showings as part of the annual showings, but how do we have to go and get 100% RA showings? If that is not the approach, then do we have to make assumptions on on how do you get to that last 10%, or be consistent with the ISO summer assessment? The goal here is to perform a stochastic assessment with only the RA showings or agreed upon resource mix, whatever that is going to be, and basically say, these are my resources, these are 500 different combinations of my load, wind, solar profiles, then you draw outage draws, and then you run the simulations, look at loss of load hours, and determine if you have if the fleet as a whole meets that 1 day in 10 requirement, right? So the ask or the request here is help us define what this framework would look like. In the comments, we will ask specific questions in our feedback request in the next 2 weeks. If you guys think about and give some ideas when we come back on the 17th of November, we would like to have a more specific conversation around the year ahead assessment part. So then I go to the next slide. I'm trying to frame all of these, and then we will take a pause and have a more engaged conversation. For the 2 to 4 year time frame, it is authorized procurement happens in that 2 to 4 year time frame. You have contracted capacity, and you have capacity that is in construction but not online yet. So there are different phases of resources. So when we put all of that together, how does the reliability of the system ISO-BAA look for years 2, 3, and 4? So do we study existing installed capacity, authorize procurement? Do we subtract out resources that are contracted elsewhere? How do we get that information? Do we have the goal is to determine sufficient capacity years 2 to 4. If that is not, then at least we'll have enough information at the BAA level that we all agree to as a process to figure out what to do at that particular point in time. The next more important is to get forward visibility. In years 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, do we have enough being planned for? And how do we get that information when you have multiple LRAs and LSCs? Do we get a way to incorporate all of the planning, the IRPs from all of these different LRAs put together and their plans in this time frame? And here we could do more around the PRM calculations, the ELCC calculations for the various resource types. There is discussion around how do you look at, do you look at the gross peak hour, the net peak hour, do you look at the performance of resources during the loss of load hours alone? So there are different ways of looking at that information, but basically get a sense based on probabilistic assessment to analyze if you put all of these resources together in the study framework that we all review and get a feeling of comfort that we have enough being planned for. So as I mentioned earlier, I think the plan is we focus on the year ahead timeframe discussion in the November working group, focus on 2 to 4 years ahead assessment in the December working group, and then in January when we meet, we talk about 5 to 10 year ahead. I'm assuming the conversations that happen in the year ahead will inform how you think about 2 to 4, and that will inform how you think about 5 to 10. So we might bring stuff together, but basically that is the idea, or thinking about sufficiency of resources across time horizons. Now I'll pause for initial reactions. And
Do you want me to offer a suggestion? And maybe I'll look at the room first. We've been going for about 2.5 hours without a break. Would folks like a break right now? Before? I see some nodding. I'm assuming that people on the phone. Jeff, do you want to?
Yeah, Partha, so yeah, I'm facilitating from mid-room now. So, but I just wanted to jump in. But there's a couple of decisions that we can make here. One's to break now, or maybe no break. I think I heard break now. And the other is, this has been extremely informative. Are we all comfortable eating into the problem statement 2 and 3 discussion and just going with the flow here? And I'm only serving the people in the room. If anyone on WebEx objects, please chime in. But I want to make sure those 2 decisions were being made. It looks like we're good to go. So we're breaking.
All right, thank you. Everyone on WebEx, we're going to take a 15-minute break. We will return around 11:45.
All right. There we go. We are live now.
Thank you. All right, everybody, we are back from break. This is Jeff McDonald, and we had some discussion here about how to be dynamic and accommodating with the schedule for today. Aditya's presentation has been very interesting. I think we wanted to make sure we left time not only for the remainder, but for discussion and so forth. So looks like we're probably going to defer discussion of participant feedback on the second and third matters until the next meeting. And that will give some time for discussion on Aditya's presentation. And like I said, I think we'll have a bit of back and forth on that. We still, I think we're still looking to go until 1, even with cutting out that content, and we'll readjust when we get to the end of the discussion of Aditya's topics. So I just wanted to put that potential schedule change or definite schedule change on cutting the second and third problem statement discussion, and we'll see we'll see where we are in about an hour and see if we need to make more schedule adjustments. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Aditya.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, so because the next working group meetings focus will be on the year ahead time frame, I would like to get some initial reaction on what you all think about how what a useful assessment for this time frame would look like. Yes, Noah?
No time. Middle river power. Sorry, it's been a while. It's been a long day. All right. So on the year ahead time frame, I think there should be possibly 2 types of. One is possibly at the beginning of or prior to the compliance year to validate and understand. Thanks. That's not uncomfortable. How much, what type of capacity or how much capacity the ISO needs to run a reliable system. Right. That should set maybe the default planning reserve margin or give some guidance on what the PRM ought to be so that the ISO knows. Then the second time frame would essentially be after the year ahead showings come in. We can talk about whether or not that's 100% for 12 months versus what we currently have. But ultimately, at that point, if not, there's insufficient capacity that is brought to the ISO, then the ISO can figure out I can either CPM to what the ISO found it needs to be for the year ahead system for the 0.1 LOE versus what the LRAs have set themselves.
One clarifying question. So at least the initial proposal says year ahead, 2 to 4 years. I was thinking that the 2-year time frame assessment would be informative enough to go into year ahead. That's why this continuous rolling 10-year look ahead RA modeling was useful. So how should we make changes to that second year assessment, you think, or just do 2?
I think I think you can use a 2 to 4 year type of assessment for the next year. But at this point, since we don't have one sort of for the next year in the first place, I think at the first step is to create one, right, before we get to year 2. Create one for year 1 so that we can get to year 2.
Okay, thanks.
Steve Keen, Edison. Yeah, I think they're using the RA showings the 5 summer months. I think it would be useful to do that, but then also to, as part of that analysis, you should be able to tell you're getting shown resources, you know what all the resources are, and you know, you can assume that you'll get that last 10% at some point. You know, potentially do a run where you're making an assumption about what those resources will be. And that type of information would be, I think, one of the things would be, for example, if you're not shown any imports, and I don't know what shows up on the year ahead, the annual filings, but you know, if they're not showing difference between, say, the last year is they're not showing the imports, then you can, you know, you can assume that there would be imports, or if they're leaving off certain resources, you know, that you can see that you know are here and are planning to be online summer, that aren't shown on the RA showings. For some sense, do kind of 2 showings. One is, you know, just with the 10% or the 90% that's shown, how good is that? But then also adding in like your best guess of what the remaining 10% might be. See how that's playing out.
Yeah, I think doing an assessment of the 90%, I don't know if it'll help much because it's obviously short of known requirements. So maybe we have to figure out how do we get to that 100%, either through a showings part or an assumption that we develop for the 10%. It's something that we probably should work on.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I see going on, I mean, it used to be fairly simple because all the resources were fast-fired resources. It was simple, but now it's very much depends upon the makeup of RA fleet you're getting. How much of it is solar, how much wind, what does that mean? And at least for this next year, it's still with an LCC. The year after that, at least for the PUC, based on slice of day, so it's different. But I don't know what the rules are that the other local regulatory authorities use. So CAISO kind of looking at the resources that are being and potentially estimating what you think might go up, and then running that and giving your assessment of how the reliability is. I think that would be a useful tool, both for all of the participants and for the ISO, especially to realize how likely they need to backstop or under any one of the backstops, either entities being short or even if they've all met their RA requirements. But, you know, if there's a collective deficiency or a significant event type thing where you would have to backstop.
Thanks for bringing up the backstop talk. This is Partha from the ISO, and I wanted to provide a clarification. You asked an earlier question. I think I just wanted to make sure that we were clear, and I think what we really need is sort of maybe a refresh in terms of our existing processes. It's like, at least in terms of our CPM authorities, how we backstop and how we do our assessments. They are a little different between what we do on the system basis, those processes today, and how we look at it on a local basis, what the assessments look like and the processes we do in assessments, and they're not necessarily just a one-for-one and how those work. So my suggestion is that it seems like some of the questions you're getting at are less about the modeling discussions, but more about trying to make sure that our existing, like maybe just like a level setting of our existing processes and having a discussion around what is that analysis that we do in terms of setting the local requirement, and then how do our assessments and backstops work, because they are a little different for local versus system. And so I think that providing that clarification, I think that we can think that this is maybe overlaps some of the topics on deliverability studies, well as on some of the assessments on sort of the, local and system requirements. I think some people brought up in their comments. So just maybe having provide like a level setting on what those existing processes studies look today. Is that really that'd be helpful, Steve?
Yeah, and I think it would. Because listening to you talk, it seemed to be different than what where I thought things were. So I think, yeah, and like my understanding comes from having been, doing this for a long time, but there's a lot of people in this room that haven't been doing it for almost 20 years with RA now. So yeah, level setting as to just what analyses the CAISO use for backstops. And that's what I was trying to get at with some of the things before, is I think there are differences between how you do that for system and how you do it for local. And I mean, it may be that some of the people that are in these discussions could benefit just from, going through, okay, here's CPM rules that we have. And when you backstop with CPM. When it's backstop or the other types of procurement you can CP.
That's a fair clarification, because they really are materially different between local and system. So like, I think that providing that, that level setting, I think that probably, again, maybe dovetail a little more into like our, the effectiveness of the program designs elements and some of the reforms we might need, and a little less on the modeling front. But I think we can provide those are material, and I think that people, we heard that in the comments, a desire to. I think that like part of like the 101 and the materials, I think hopefully will help folks to level sound them. I think equally as we get into some of the specific topics, kind of giving some refresher that might look like a 201 in terms of what the current mechanics look like, how our, what the level of modeling. Because I think that, I think that they are different. So like to your point, I think that the system isn't necessarily just that simple stacking. At least it's more complicated once it gets to for what the assessments. Yeah.
The other thing I think that I do not have an you did with flexible resources. We check. Do you do a check other than the stack type analysis? Make sure that you have enough flexible resources, because I know the way those requirements are set are based on 3 hour and all that. And one of the things that I've seen is 3 hour requirement is not even spaced over hours. Half of it 1 hour, which is a very different type of rank.
Yep, good point. Yeah.
We do have a couple hands raised online. Let's go to Kyle with Cal Advocate.
Okay.
Lavis from Public Advocate's Office at the CPUC. And just to clarify, we're not Energy Division, we're separate. Really appreciate the background presentation here. It's definitely helpful to get more insight into your process, and definitely would look forward to a 201 version as well. Just less on the topic of the conversation of the presentation, but just from a procedural point of view, aren't we getting ahead of the working group process by introducing a proposed study framework? I was kind of under the impression that this kind of material would come in the initiative, whereas it seems like we're still focusing on the problem statements right now. So could you just happy to dig into it, but I'm just a little confused. Could you clarify?
So I think one point of feedback that I will ask as we think about this year ahead assessment is, what are we going to use this assessment for? Right now, this is more informational in the initial design proposal. The reason this moved forward into this level of discussion is because we have heard unanimous requests for clarity, more information, system-wide reliability, data, and stuff in our comments for the first working group. So not so much in the initiative phase, but it's basically still exploring what do we do in this space? How do we provide most used and useful information? Does
Okay.
that help? Anybody else wants to chime in?
All right, looks like I guess no one's chiming in. Thanks. That's funny because that was actually my next question. And really looking at the 2 to 4 year head study timeline, my question was going to be, what would CAISO do with that information? If you know you did a model and it turned out there was insufficient capacity authorized, how does CAISO see that information as actionable? What would be actionable about it? But maybe, maybe that's the question you have for us as stakeholders. So maybe you could respond to that.
Kyle, you were not very clear in the room, but are you saying what will CAISO do with this information?
Yeah. My question is just what is actionable if CAISO were to, if the 2 to 4 year, particularly this particular study, were to show that there was insufficient capacity authorized, what would be actionable about that information for CAISO?
So one that comes to mind is like how I laid out the shared responsibility slide earlier. We would go back to the LRAs and communicate that information that, hey, this is what we are observing. Did we miss anything? Is anything else in the works? So basically providing that system-wide visibility is the core objective of this entire exercise. What do we do is what the LRAs will eventually do with that information. In the year ahead timeframe, we could probably think about some other aspects. It could help with determining, like Steve mentioned, like Noah mentioned, how do we think about CPM and backstop and other activities there. But the 2 to 4 and 5 to 10 is all forward-looking insights that will help inform decision makers and policy makers and stakeholders to take necessary steps.
Okay. Thanks. And then my last question is really going back to the existing processes that you described earlier. And I was wondering if maybe you could be helpful to walk through an example of the 3 RMRs that came out in August 2022. And, those were justified using an 18.5% PRM requirement for 8 p.m. in September. And I'm just wondering, would you be able to situate how that determination came out of the existing assessment processes?
Yeah, I'll have to follow up with you on that.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you. Noah?
Noah Tom from Middle Republican. Wondering if Kyle, maybe we can ask Kyle sort of similar question. If out of this type of year ahead analysis, the ISO determines a PRM that is higher than what the CPUC has set, what do you think that information, or how do you think that information should flow back to the PUC? Because essentially that means that potentially PUC is not setting a program that is reliable.
No, thanks, Noah. And I think that part of part of our goal is we recognize that there are different footprints that we might be looking at, different sets of resources, and I think that at the core, our desire is to work in harmony with these various programs. I think that everyone's sort of seeing that there is a desire, there's a need to have greater information and greater visibility. So I think it's probably, to me, it'd be kind of jumping the gun a little bit to say, hey, what are we going to do when we're different? But I do think that there's a strong desire to, to align assumptions, align sort of what's included in the studies and the purpose. But I think there's kind of maybe a little open-ended question in terms of that policy discussion, in terms of where, how would, the ISO's program evolve, and how could these be used? At the core, the one thing we discussed was sort of the, backstop, to the degree that we're incurring costs or, to correct, for example, resource deficiencies, is there a way that we could use this modeling to identify, who's short and have cost allocation associated with that? So that's sort of one topic where, having some discussion on, like, is this a good mechanism? It could be the case where we agree that we should evolve our backstop processes, evolve our substitution processes, et cetera, and that there could be sort of similar tie-ins. But I think that, like, at the starting point, I think our real goal is to, like, how can we provide really good, effective, timely information and work in partnership with the CEC, with the CPUC, with the other LRAs, into providing this information in a timely manner across our whole footprint, because we recognize that it's, that the PUC, it's obviously 90% of the load within our footprint, but not 100%. So,
if I may, to respond, I think, certainly a goal here is for the ISO is able to maintain a system that meets 0.1 or better reliability metrics. My concern is that if LRAs are not setting their programs to that standard, then the ISO certainly currently with tariff is only able to manage essentially the RA fleet to whatever those standards are, and that is not real. That is worse than 0.1. Maybe the question is, do we agree with that?
We do have 3 hands on WebEx. Turn it over to them for a second. So
Can we go to Lauren in the room first,
Sure.
please? Sorry, I missed her in the first.
Thanks. This is Lauren Carr from LCCA. I think regardless of whether or not this results in a backstop or however the result of this information, how it's used, I think I just wanted to emphasize the importance of having both an assessment of the showings and something that happens before there are showings, like a forward assessment. Maybe it's 2 years ahead, like you said, or something closer, maybe like a year before the showings are due or something like that. So it informs what the showings need to look like in order to, when you get to that first question, are the year ahead showings adequate? LSEs can do what they need to do to make sure that answer is yes. So just wanted to emphasize the importance of something in the forward time frame that's transparent and informative, so that once we get to evaluating what actually comes in as a showing, it's more likely to be adequate and you can minimize the need for actions to cure at the back end.
Thanks, Lauren.
All right, let's move to Mary Neal. Mary, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is Mary Neal representing ARM. So I just had a couple of clarifying questions. I think my concerns have largely been addressed by previous questions, but just on this slide, when it says 100% annual RA showings in the year ahead time frame, but I just want to be clear that the proposal here is not that CAISO will be requiring some kind of showing in the year ahead time frame for 100% of the annual RA obligation. That's not, well, you might want to assume that, but or somehow fill that in as, but that's not the proposal.
Right. For the modeling purposes, we will have to get to 100% showings. It could be a combination of using 90% and then making assumptions that are reasonable for the remaining 10%. So we'll have to figure out how to get there. But I think the core of the question here is, can we reasonably assume all the resources that will be available to the system are accounted for? And whatever that approach ends up being. So that's an assumption. So basically you're trying to say 100% lower, 100% showings is what we need to be able to effectively assess the fleet for the year ahead time frame. So doing anything with less than that will not yield a useful answer, because if I say 90%, then I say there is a gap. And yeah, right, there is it's already you're planning with less, there is a gap. True. So we want this information to be used and useful. So you're right there, Mary.
Understood, understood. And then on the objective, it talks about actions to cure, but it sounds like this would not be a proposal to require specific curative actions. It sounds more like a proposal that the information would be provided to LRAs and they may decide to take or require specific curative actions. Am I understanding that properly?
Yes, as of 12:16 p.m., that is correct. But if the working group decides a different path, yeah, then.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
All right, Grant Glazer, go ahead. Event producer, can we unmute Grant's line?
Glazer with Emanate Energy. Two clarifying questions. First is thinking more about the 5 to 10 year out studies. Do all LRAs do IRPs in addition to the IOUs?
I do not know. And that is one other exercise of this. When you get to this point, we want to figure out how it is done. McLean wants to. Chris, you want to address that?
Sure. So Christopher McLean, staff, California Energy Commission. So the Energy Commission attempts to facilitate sort of an IRP light process with POUs. There's really those entities, have their own boards and leadership, and they do things in accordance with, to meet the needs of their members. So while there may be IRPs that show up and are, usable and readable, counting on them to sync up with some annual schedule or something like that maybe is a higher bar. There may be the potential for, if we can facilitate or build a framework to make it easier for those entities to plug into something, that there could be some opportunity space there. But right now, there's not an annual IRP requirement on non-IOUs.
Got it. Thank you. The second question real quick is just, I guess, whether CAISO is thinking that these sorts of 5 to 10 year ahead studies would be in addition to IRPs, or maybe, I guess I'm thinking simply from like an administrative efficiencies sake perspective. It could make sense for CAISO to take a more active role or offer a more active role in the IRPs that LRAs may already be doing, if they are. I guess I'm curious if CAISO has a reaction to that thought.
Yeah, in my previous role, I probably would say that is their policy, their IRP, and their plan, which is very similar posture, I think, in this context here too. We could offer regional insights so that can inform the IRP process, but not necessarily. I don't see an active role in each of the LRA's IRP proceedings, unless somebody is otherwise. So I used to do IRPs before, at least based on my single experience. The way we do it is, this is my load, this is my generation resources, I expect this from imports, and the import is typically assumed to be a swing bus in power system planning, right, where we assume whatever is expected shows up at the time that you ask for. I think that paradigm is changing, that everybody's transitioning to the same kinds of solar and storage and wind kind of resources, carbon-free resources. So reliance on the neighbor and assuming that import will be available is where my challenge has always been. So you can't assume 0 because that is not right. You can't assume 3,000 because that might be overshooting reliance on your neighbor. So how do you bring all of those pieces together and have sufficient visibility? I think this assessment that the ISO is proposing to do is going to be that 10,000 foot level. It's not going to be granular, but it's going to be high level are we having enough in all time frames? So I'll probably pause there.
We do have
Okay,
one more hand raised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick Cunningham with Public Advocate's Office. Go ahead.
Hello, Patrick Cunningham with the Public Advocate's Office. I just wanted to express a concern with the 1 year ahead assessment that if the objective is to establish what is reliable, then it seems to invalidate the purpose of RA programs of the LRAs. Like the CPUC can set up an RA program and have requirements that meet a 0.1 LOLE, but the CAISO could say like, well, it doesn't meet a 0.1 using our inputs and assumptions, and there are so many LOLE inputs and assumptions to mess that around. It becomes kind of a subjective game. But if the ISO says, well, your showings aren't up to par for what we need, so we're gonna, you need to go and procure more, or on a grid-wide basis, we're gonna do backstop procurement and allocate that out. It seems to come down to why bother having LRAs come up with an RA program at all if the ISO is going to be setting the standard at the grid level. And that's my initial concern with it now. Even getting the information on that seems to imply that whatever the LRAs are going to be trying to do to get to meet what they think is reliable may not matter at all if the grid operator is saying that something else is different. Just wanted to express that.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Maybe that's a follow-up question, just in terms of maybe like the timing and the information. Like, I'll just like hear more about your concerns on that topic. Because to me, like the way I think about it is that like information, information, particularly if it's good, accurate studies to inform the reliability of the system, is always helpful. Particularly if it's timely and allows action to be taken, and that particularly as we get to sort of a more complicated grid where there's there's resource dependencies in terms of like renewables charging batteries, the interplay between resources between different portfolios, and having some sort of transparency between these different programs would be could be helpful. Obviously, like if we, the timing of it matters, but especially if we're doing it multi-year forward, you can kind of see like, oh, these assessments are different. But I'd be interested in sort of understanding more about what your concerns or feedback is. Is it more just a concern about jurisdiction, or like, yeah, I'd just be interested in sort of hearing more about what your thoughts are on that in particular.
Patrick, if you want to respond, you'll have to raise your hand on WebEx. All right, let's go ahead and open his.
Patrick Cunningham of the Public Advocate's Office. Could you repeat exactly what the question was? Sorry.
Sure. I was just looking for you to expand a little bit about what your concerns are. I think that like at least how it's framing it is that like, to me, good, timely, transparent information is always helpful. And that, particularly, because, we're operating a balancing authority that has multiple LRAs, that have multiple study processes, that, if we can provide information to folks in a timely and transparent manner, that this could be helpful. And this could be helpful for the state, it could be helpful for the LRAs in terms of actions, and that, particularly as we're getting to sort of the more forward timeframes, it could shape how and what procurement they're doing as well, as opposed to doing sort of everything, just the LRAs doing it individually. So I was wondering if you could wanted to expand a little bit about what the concerns are. Is the concern sort of a cost issue because of backstop, or just be interested in sort of expanding on sort of your thoughts around that topic.
Yeah, more information is always useful. It can only help everybody understand what's going on in the grid and the reliability situation, but usually that information becomes actionable and could lead to backstop procurement and whatnot going forward. And I do believe it's the, like, this does relate to like the jurisdictional issues we brought up in our comments, saying like, well, who's in charge of kind of the system RA? Like the PU code points to the LRAs, but of course in coordination with ISO. So it's, yeah, and it's like, if we're going to have multiple reliability studies and different RA programs that are all trying to do the same thing but have different levels of different targets, and like the CPUC spends a whole massive load of time on their RA program, as you all know, and we have our own objectives for what we consider reliable, and also have oversight of how to avoid ideas of like cost efficiency and whatnot, and how to avoid any high cost to ratepayers. Whereas ISO might have different approaches to those same objectives or have different priorities. The ISO might be very interested in keeping a very reliable grid. But yeah, and like that might feed into how like a 0.1 LOLE could be designed with different ideas behind it, like what duration is tolerable and whatnot, different aspects of that. So I don't oppose the information coming out there. It's only, information is great, but it's just like the actions that will come out of that information kind of overrides what the authorities that are out there. Yeah.
That's super helpful. So I'm going to infer from your comments that the need to coordinate on assumptions, study methodologies, to make sure that there's not, like, I do think that, like, at least, I'm speaking for my own self, like, if there is, difference, if the ISO is producing vastly different results than the CEC in their studies or the PUC, there's going to be lots of questions going to be asked. And so at bare minimum, we need to really have transparency of where those differences lie, but ideally we'd have consistency going forward. So yeah, thanks for that.
Definitely agree with you. Yeah, more standards for how we approach those assumptions would be outstanding.
We do have another hand raised on WebEx. Bonnie Blair, go ahead. Bonnie, you're unmuted.
Sorry, this is Bonnie Blair. I think that was a hand raised from like before the break. I had sent a comment in the chat, but yeah, or I mistakenly raised my hand. Anyway, I don't have anything at this point. Thank you.
I thought of a funny analogy that might give us a new perspective. The idea is not to create another watch that shows the same time. The idea here is to show the time at a different place. So it's not assessing any individual LRA's effectiveness, but it's assessing the system-wide reliability. It's trying to show that time frame. So, all right. So maybe if there are no other questions in the room or online, I'll probably say, as you think about providing feedback to us over the next couple of weeks, think about the methods, models, assumptions, inputs, coordination touch points, use cases, and any other things to remember not to do, and like sequencing of when you should probably align to do the study and timeframes and things like that will be extremely useful as we come up with a proposal for the November 17th working group session. All right, thank you so much for indulging me in this conversation. Really appreciate this. Was there a hand raise? Yeah, right.
Christopher McLean, California Energy Commission staff. I think one thing we've heard a little bit through the course of today's discussion is that, maybe there's some concern across different RA or LRA methodologies and approaches to all this. So that paradigm has existed for a while. To the extent that we can look back and say, oh, hey, here was a problem, is it traceable to some other LRA methodology besides the PUC's approach? If there's really a problem there, it seems like we should be able to uncover it and shed some light on how others should be doing it. Otherwise, I think it doesn't really help a lot to, plausibly point to other LRA approaches and wonder if there's a problem and seek some, conformance in that approach. I think that, the LRAs, the other LRAs who do things the way they do things, again, we've mentioned they've got their own boards, they're accountable to their members, they're doing things in plausibly a good utility practice, and you could characterize it as the right way. So if there really is a problem, we ought to uncover it and discuss what that is.
Thanks, Chris. Right, hearing none, yes, no.
Chris, Bill from Middle River. Just thinking through that comment, I don't think I'm advocating or think that there's an ability here to say this 100 megawatts is due to this particular LRA program. I think what I'm trying to say is in aggregate for the California Act. So here's the amount of capacity that it needs to ensure a reliable system, and how to get that type of conversion from, for every LRA when everything gets shown in. I think right now, as a threshold matter, I find that various PRMs and programs that are from different LRAs may not be fully reliable, and that is causing some consternation on whether or not the ISO is able to manage its system correctly, as well as whether or not there's leaning on the system of one LRA to another.
Thanks, everyone. I will pass it on to Chris.
Thank you. Great discussion. Great presentation. So I mentioned earlier, we were being dynamic with the schedule. We've got about 25 minutes left, and I think that gives us enough time to cover much of, since we're cutting out the discussion of problem statements 2 and 3. I think we can cover the rest of the content. Let me see. Give me just a second here. Yeah. Tell you what. Let's go. Yeah, these are. All right, let's spend a few minutes on principles and goals. I think I just want to make sure we have time for about the last 3 or 4 slides. So I'm a little reluctant to launch into this too much, but I'll tell you what, in the interest of time, but still wanting to cover this because I think it's important. What I'll do is I'll set this up such that we've all read the principles and goals. We discussed them last time. I'll set this up so that if participants do have something that they feel a higher level of conviction over, but rather than try to stimulate a discussion on this, I'll just open this up to comments to see if anyone, there were some folks who had some fairly strong, thoughts or positions on principles and on the principles and goals. So let me just open it up, and this covers slides 47, 48, and 49 and 50. So 47 through 50, principles and goals. Does anyone have any comments they would like to make? And I I hate to shortchange the discussion on this. We will cover it in more detail next time, but there are some important slides coming up that I'd like to make sure we get through. So I'll throw out, so I said I wasn't going to stimulate some conversation, but you know what? Let's just do that instead, because we do have a couple minutes. So I saw some terms that I wasn't entirely sure how to enforce or inject into this process in a way that could be meaningful, perhaps the way that was intended by the author. So I saw some comments. So affordable and equity were two that jumped out to me that perhaps merited some additional discussion, because those are difficult. I mean, every person is, I think I said earlier, I hate using the word fair because it means something different to everybody. In a sense, some of these terms might have a different meaning to different people. Simple, I think I understand. Transactable, I believe I understand. But for the folks, and I'm on slide 48, for the folks who felt that affordable and equity, or I think equitable is also substitutable there, would anyone like to chime in and provide a little bit of discussion on, I think we all understand at a high level, but just taking the conversation a little farther, how do we implement those concepts in this process? Is there a measurability that's implied there? How do we do that? And so if somebody from PGP or NCPA would like to chime in, I would love to have that discussion for a little while if you're inclined.
We have Mike Whitney from NCPA on the line.
Oh, terrific. Hey, thanks for chiming in again, Mike.
NCPA.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
and
great.
Thanks again for chiming in again.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. I really like the working group structure. Yeah, as far as affordable, you know, there's just been some questions about the RAIN program and the RAIN price, and you know, is it you know, an appropriate incentive or deterrent, or you know, however you want to look at it, incentive to submit bids in real time and the day ahead. And you know, we're just we know that we've seen some really high market prices, and so you know, we want to keep, you know, the CAISO RA program affordable, you know, kind of tied to the existing cost of new entry methodology and the you know, like in the CPM soft offer cap and whatnot. So that's kind of what we're getting at there with affordable. You know, if we adjust those RAIN prices, you know, keep them kind of, you know, anchored down to the actual cost of a generation. And then as far as like the LRA legal rights, you know, it's just some LRAs, you know, cover, you know, really wide footprints. Our LRAs are smaller, and you know, they a lot of them own their own resources, so they really know the characteristics and how they operate. And so there's various other approaches out there that, you know, don't really apply to those specific facilities. So so we think it's really important that the individual LRAs, you know, continue to be able to, you know, establish, you know, their accounting rules, you know, as long as they're, you know, somewhat consistent with the CAISO defaults, and reasonable and defensible. So there's NCPA's additional context for those two goals, principles.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful, at least to me. I have a much better understanding of what you were getting at there. Let me throw out something for you as an offer. So I appreciate your definition of, or your the background for the concept of affordable. So you're just looking to benchmark it to a market cost for a new you know, a typical market cost for new generation. Is an affordable can mean different things, Are you open to me giving a little bit of thought to a different term that tries to get to the same point that you're making, but that is a little more specific? And I'll throw it by you before I throw it by the group. But is that okay with you if I look for a different term for the concept you're applying here?
And Mike, you'll have to re-raise your hand and we'll have to unmute reply. All right. I'm not seeing Mike's hand up, but
I'll take your silence as a yes, Mike. I wonder how many people have had to repeat the first two sentences of their response, because of the delay. So, okay. So that's great. I appreciate it. I just want to have a little bit of conversation about a couple of the terms that I think will need a little bit more definition in order to be meaningfully applied. With that said, I'll move forward past the principles and goals comments. We've got about 15 minutes left, and we'll address some of the last.
we did have PGP's hand.
Oh,
if you wanted to.
fantastic. I'm sorry.
So we have PGP on the line with their hand raised, but then also Peninsula Cleat may want to make a comment also. So let's go to Cybele with PGP.
Hi, this is Sybil with Public Generating Pools. And actually, I think our, mention of equity is really captured with the idea of consistency. And, this other definition that was up here was LRA, RA standards, help avoid cautious between LRAs. I think, we're thinking in the broader regional context as well, planning to a consistent regional RA standard with other programs, for example, actually arriving at the 0.1 loss of load expectation, enables participants to come to the regional marketplace, the EDAM, or later just in the EIM on a level playing field. And so I think, level playing field is, you can capture it probably either with consistency or equity, but that's the intent there. And it sounds like it applies with, it's really about the multiple RA programs that are out there and enabling those to reach a common standard.
Okay, fantastic. No, I appreciate the context for that. And so with respect to planning reserves and counting rules, there needs to be some, you're asking that there be some consideration of having some consistency across the region.
Well, I think if you plan to a common standard with robust analysis, there can be different methodologies for counting rules, et cetera, for how the program is implemented, as long as it's, having that robust analysis to reach that standard. So, I mean, for example, I think like this slice of day concept was introduced, as I understand it, to address some of the challenges with diminishing ELCC on solar resources and the operational challenges around that. And, similarly, the whole construct of ELCC has been challenged over time as we reach high renewable penetration levels. Well, the RAP program has not grappled with that dilemma quite yet, but they're still planning to, both programs, while they're in different, dealing with different challenges, have different implementation approaches, should meet a regional RA standard of an appropriate loss of load expectation, regardless of the details of the objective of the analysis should be to reach that standard, and the implementation may be different. So I think you were adding a level there that I'm not sure is so important from our perspective. I think we recognize that there are different challenges and different means for implementing the programs, but it's about having the same objective standard of reliability for those programs that you're targeting.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. Just weaving my understanding based on some, probably a couple of different points during this meeting today. One of the things I was hearing was a recognition that building from the bottom up to meet your reliability standards is important, and the counting rules is an important aspect of actually achieving the planning standards. I think I understand your comment to be that might be a level of detail that might be too detailed of an issue to address, but you feel that the planning standards themselves should be consistent across the region.
Or that it's okay to have different methodologies. Certainly if there's issues embedded in the current methodology, they should be fixed, right? But that it's okay to have different methodologies across programs. I think similar to the prior commenter, if certain LRAs are objectively meeting that standard, but maybe they have slight differences in the way they approach their analysis or something like that, but maybe that's okay. And just sort of tying it back to the prior conversation, I think this is where the multi-year outlook comes in, is that you have to plan to a standard and know if you have an issue or an inconsistency or a lack of a reliable system at large far enough in advance to remedy the situation. And similarly, looking further out in time where it truly is, planning level analysis is where you can have coordination and learning across the RA programs to figure out what that consistency really means, right? And then to remedy the issue. And also in terms of managing interoperability before it becomes a challenge, upstream, making sure that you're having enough coordination across the programs to, for example, make sure there's not double counting going on if you're including imports in your evaluation.
Okay. Okay, terrific. Yeah, thank you very much. I do think I understand what you meant by equity much better, so thank you.
Thank you.
And then if we have time, we can move to Doug Carpa with Peninsula Clean Energy real quick.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can take one more comment on this topic.
All right, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Doug Carpa, Peninsula Clean Energy. Yeah, I just thought I might add an additional bit of color on the affordability or affordable concept. It's also kind of a concern that's looming in the back of our minds as well, in part because, I should probably preface it, as a CCA, we are, of course, very engaged in the electricity decarbonization space, but we also do a lot in building and transportation electrification, and which is like a much bigger chunk of statewide carbon emissions than electricity is. And one of the concerns is like really fundamentally doing everything that we can to not drive up rates overall, because as you do, then of course heat pumps and EVs become not cost effective anymore, and you're actively hampering decarbonization by having rates climb. And so in the RA space, one of the things that's really grabbing, of course, the attention are the very, very high prices that we're seeing in the market. And so in here, I think the affordability lens, I think really needs to get applied across the board with kind of whatever we do. We'll always, we should always be asking the question of, will this policy or this analysis or doing whatever have the impact of being duplicative in a way or in some other form be driving up prices in the RA market, because that, I mean, you know, we can pay more for RA, but that really doesn't necessarily get us any more reliability. That depends on the steel in the ground, not necessarily the RA contracts. And one of the things in particular that I worry about is, you know, of course, we're under the CPUC program, so we're moving to slice of day, and we are going to be having an extremely heavy solar wind storage because we're moving to fully meet our load with 100% renewables in all hours within the next couple of years, getting off gas. So what we don't want to be is in a situation where slice of day leads us to like, yeah, this is the portfolio you need to have. And then CAISO has a different metric that it's using, you know, for understandable reasons because it's multiple LRAs. But if the two are not closely aligned enough, then we're going to like have to be paying for RA compliance for the CPUC set of rules and then cutting a separate check for complying for the CAISO rules and backstop there. And so I think a lot of those consistency or interoperability conversations are going to play out in terms of affordability, just because operational what it means for LSEs trying to sort of keep our eye on both walls. So as we go through and start asking these questions, I think circling back and asking the question, what impact is this going to have on the market, is always going to be important, just given where we are, in particularly in California these days, because electricity rates here are very high, right? I don't know. Hope that helps. Yep.
That helps quite a bit, Doug, and I couldn't agree more given my background. I think you always, you know, reliability is extremely important, if not the most important thing, but you always have to get back to what does this do to the markets. So I like how you ended that. I appreciate it.
Great. So you can count on me for that.
All right. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Doug. All right, so let's move on. We have a little bit of time left, and I think CB Hall was going to talk a little bit with us about day-ahead sufficiency and settlements. So.
Hi, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll just, maybe I just have a few minutes here, it looks like. So I'll keep it brief, right? I think we're ending at 1.
Yeah, that was the plan.
Okay, cool. So this is really just a quick public service announcement, if you will. We are looking forward to taking on some policy work that we are calling day-ahead sufficiency and settlements. And this work really is just a renamed version of the policy work that was embedded in the EDAM ISO BAA Participation Rules Initiative. And more specifically, if for those of you who are familiar with that initiative, we went to the Board of Governors in September with our Track A1 policy, and that was approved. And then we were planning to launch Track A2 and Track B, which is all very confusing, all these different tracks. So what we're doing here is we're calling it something that's a little bit more helpful. Day-ahead sufficiency and settlements. And so this scope that you'll see here on this slide is basically identical to the scope that was embedded in those two tracks, A2 and B. And the other point, the reason we're advertising it here today is because there is a lot of overlap with RA policy. And some of these topics may require significant coordination with the RA modeling and program design effort. So we just want to make sure you're all aware of that, and would love to work with you on these topics. So I'll just, I guess, since I only have like a couple minutes, maybe I'll just briefly outline the scope here so you can kind of see what's going on in this one slide. If you look at the left part of the table there, you'll see 3 topics, categories of topics. What we're trying to do here is make sure that the CAISO BAA, ultimately we want to make sure the BAA does not fail the day ahead resource sufficiency evaluation, which will be conducted at 10 o'clock, right after the day ahead market closes. And that evaluation, of course, is looking at all eligible supply offers in cyber, and it's comparing to our RSE obligations, which are primarily demand forecast, imbalance reserve requirements, AS requirements. It's looking across all 24 intervals. It's doing an optimization without transmission constraints. But anyway, the point here is that we want to know what our position is as of 9 a.m. so that if it looks like we're going to be short and it looks like we might fail, we want to be able to take action ultimately to cure if need be. So the first topic here says calculate day ahead RSE position at 9 a.m. The good news is the EDAM design already outlines something called advisory RSEs, which will be conducted before 10 a.m. and are for information to help each BAA understand how they're tracking towards meeting, passing the RSE. And so we'll have that. But the thing is, at 9 o'clock, we may not have all of the offers in cyber that we are anticipating, because RA resources, the bidding deadline is 10 o'clock, not 9. So as of 9, we might have a pretty good idea, but not a full picture. And so we want to supplement that information with offers that we can expect between 9 and 10 from RA resources. So that's the second row there. And then the other thing we want to do is account for reliability demand response resources. And that was kind of part of the EDAM policy that was approved earlier in the year. So we need to talk about exactly how to do that for the CAISO BAA. And then if you work down the table here, you can see, so the next step would be curing shortfalls. How would we do that as a BAA? Certainly we might be able to use some of our existing authority, but that may not be the most efficient way to do it. So maybe we can explore using some kind of new authority to procure what we're calling cure capacity to get us over the hurdle of the 10 a.m. RSE. And then finally, we have to talk about settlements. If we do in fact have to cure, how are we going to allocate those costs based on causation? And if we unfortunately fail the RSE, how will we allocate the surcharges? And then also revenues. If another BAA fails and we're allocated some of those revenues, how do we allocate those? So that's the kind of the scope, the proposed scope for this new work, which is coming soon. We're just trying to figure out how to integrate this work into a busy calendar this fall, and lots of working groups and a lot of stakeholder discussions. So more to come soon, and a market notice to come soon.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, CB.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
All right, so that was just, as CB said, a public service announcement, so you have an awareness of this. I'm just going to skip through a couple slides. We're at 1 o'clock. I'm happy to go a little bit longer if you like, but I think we're skipping through reviewing some of the comments that I believe we can catch next time, no problem. So, and they're all written down here in the slides. I'd encourage you to look at them. They're summarized, I think, fairly nicely, easier than reading through the longer form. So I wanted to spend just maybe 2 minutes touching base on a proposed schedule through January. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, one of the concerns I had was that we wouldn't have a structured way of moving forward. The primary goal I see for the working group, and Middle River had asked this question, what's the goal? I think it's to add definition and resolution to the problem statements and add different aspects or different problem statements as this working group determines are appropriate. So I want to make sure that at least until this working group gets its legs and makes some decisions about prioritization and how they would like to move forward, I wanted to set some meetings up so that we were continuing to make progress and work towards our goals. So that was what I had in mind when I did this, and there's a bit of a cycle to this by general topic. So you we discuss, or we discover and discuss the problem statement and aspects to it. We discuss it again. We get some, maybe a deep dive on 1 or 2 or 3 aspects of that from the ISO. That buys the ISO some time to leave a deep dive into their bandwidth, because they will see that coming from the couple of meetings prior to that as we're discussing it. Then after the deep dive, the working group discusses and further refines it. Hopefully, at that point, we start to wrap it up, and that gets to the Middle River question earlier of what's the deliverable, what's the point. And so the point then would be after 3 or 4 meetings that we would have one part of a problem statement, or maybe a whole problem statement defined. Everybody was not in agreement, but everybody had an opportunity to input and to discuss and to help refine. And then we move that over to the ISO for consideration in their initiative process. And so we would have, because that's a multiple meeting approach, we would have a couple of aspects of problem statements, or a couple of problem statements that we're working concurrently in different stages. We may not decide to do that long term, but I thought we could do that short term just to make sure that we're making progress on things through what is generally a non-progress period of the year, which is between Thanksgiving and New Year's. And so I just thought it would be nice to set these things up and get us through January. And in that process, we can figure out as a group if we want to do it differently or not. So having said that, I won't walk through the different elements of this. It's in the slide presentation. And I think Caitlin was going to go over how you can comment on things and so forth and wrap the meeting up for us. But I just wanted to cover, some thought went into this. It's not set in stone, but I just want to make sure we had a plan for the next couple months to try and move the ball forward on a few aspects of these problem statements. So thank you very much, and I'll kick it over to Caitlin.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I know we're at time, so we'll wrap it up with the next steps. So the next working group meeting is going to be on Friday, November 17th. We did just see a note that there's a consisting meeting potentially for CPUC and the RA proceeding. So for now, that is tentatively scheduled as a virtual meeting. We did put out a notice for that. And then next week we have a Slice of Day workshop that's going to be in the same room here on site, or with the option to participate on WebEx. That'll be at 10 a.m. on November 8th. And so there's a link to register if you plan on being in person. That went out in our notice a few weeks ago. So related to today's discussion in this working group meeting, we're going to post a comment template with a few questions tomorrow, but we do ask you submit those written comments by November 13th. And there in that second bullet point, there's the link to the web page and the commenting tool. And then if you do want to reach out to Jess,
Caitlin, would you mind if I just injected one thing? And I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I committed earlier to surveying for ranking topics, and we could do that in the form for responses to this meeting, or we could do it separately. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that message was heard, and we'll follow through with that through one of those two forms.
Okay. And then also for Jess, if you do want to indicate that you'd like to present or any topics that you'd like to present on a future meeting, his contact information is there. So I think that's it for us today. Thank you everyone who joined in person and everyone online for your participation.